What is going on, Fite Feeders? Welcome back to Fite Feed. Today, I am going to be going through the entire pay-per-view card for UFC 323. This is the last pay-per-view card that we will see as fans in the current era of the UFC prior to them joining with Paramount Plus. Now, we all got a nice, exciting Thanksgiving, not really exciting, but a shocking Thanksgiving announcement from Dana White himself on IG Live, where he shared what is to become of the first fight card on the Paramount Plus regime. And I'm not going to dive into that, but it'll be interesting to see where things go. But since this is the last pay-per-view of the current era of the UFC, we're going to go ahead and dive in and break down all of the fights from start to finish. This fight card is actually one of the best pay-per-view cards we've had this year. We've got the return of the machine, Merab Dvalishvili, and he's taking on Petr Yan in a rematch. So this is a number 2 fight between those two fighters. And guys, if you haven't heard it already, Merab's got a lot on the line in this matchup specifically. Not only is he going for 4 total defenses in the bantamweight division, which would mark the most title defenses by any other bantamweight in history of the UFC. So if Merab beats Petr, he's not only snatching that record, but he'll also snatch the record for most title defenses in 1 year, which is 4. Well, it would be 4. Right now, he is tied at 3 with several others, but he is trying to make history in this fight by snatching that new record, getting 4 title defenses in 1 calendar year and 4 title defenses at the bantamweight division. So a lot on the line from Merab Dvalishvili. Petr Yan trying to snatch back that gold that he once held and obviously lost to Aljo. And then right before that fight, we've got a massive fight between Alexandre Pantoja, the reigning and defending champ at flyweight, one of the most dominant flyweight champions since Demetrius Johnson left the UFC. I believe Pantoja actually is the most dominant, considering that he is the only one to get over 3 defenses in this weight class. If you guys remember, like, we've been trading, or the UFC flyweight division's been trading that belt like fight after fight for several years until Pantoja finally got his chance at Moreno and was able to take the belt from him. And since then, Pantoja has had a couple of fights where it was a bit questionable, right? Like against Urseg, a lot of people thought Urseg could have won. But ever since then, guys, Pantoja has been not only winning these fights, but dominantly finishing these fights, which you got to love. And then outside of that, we've got some amazing other matchups here. You've got obviously Henry Cejduo with his retirement fight against Payton Talbott. Very fun fight there. You've got Jan Blachowicz versus Bogdan Guskov, another fantastic fight on the main card. Then if we take a look at the undercard, you've got Nazim Sadiq versus Fares Ziam, which is another banger of a matchup. Manuel Torres versus Grant Dawson. Like, every one of these fights, guys, even Macy Barber, Karine Silva should be a very fun fight. I'm excited to see Iwo Brandowski. I don't know how to say his last name, but this is a guy coming off Contender Series. And guys, if you didn't watch the episode that he had for the Contender Series, he went out there and his opponent had like significantly more fights than him and stuff. And the entire commentating booth was just gassing up his opponent the entire time. Like, even as Iwo was walking out, like, they were talking about how good this guy's opponent is, blah, blah, blah. He goes out there, lands an overhand right, and stiffens this guy out cold. So Iwo, I think, has a unique skill set, and he's definitely got some fun finishes. So he will be fun to watch on this card. Terrence McKinney, Chris Duncan. I mean, guys, the list goes on. I'm not going to sit here and try to recite every name. You're going to see how I'm breaking down each of these fights, who I'm picking to win in each fight. We'll go ahead and dive in to the fight card. Before I dive in, just want to ask if you guys could please give this video a like. Also, please hype this video up if you're looking to help me out just a little bit, because it'll help share this video with more fans of MMA, so I would truly appreciate that. Let's go ahead and dive into the first fight of the night. All right, guys, fight number 1 on the card. We've got Muhammad Naimov versus Mairon Santos. Naimov's 31 years old, 5'9" with a 70-inch reach. He's got a 13-3 professional record, 5-1 in the UFC. Naimov's got 5 wins by KO, a 38% KO rate. 3 wins by submission, a 23% submission rate. 5 wins by decision, a 38% decision rate, giving Naimov a 62% finishing rate overall. Taking a look at Naimov's losses, he's got 1 loss by submission, 33%, and then 2 losses by decision, which is 67% of his losses overall. His last 4 fights, he's got a 3-1 record, win over Eric Silva, win over Konoff Lee, and a win over Bogdan Grad. His only loss coming by way of Felipe Lima, which, if I remember correctly, Felipe Lima came in on short notice and was able to get it done. So shout out to Felipe Lima on that one, because Muhammad Naimov's been a guy that I feel like has been switching off a lot of these contenders or these like prospects, right? He may have his hands full here though. Mairon Santos, 25 years old, 5'7" with a 72-inch reach, 16-1 as a professional, 3-0 in the UFC. He's got 8 wins by KO, 50% KO rate, 0 wins by submission, which is a bit surprising, and then 8 wins by decision, so 50% decision rate, giving Mairon Santos a 50% finishing rate overall. Taking a look at his losses, Mairon Santos has 1 loss, which was by way of KO, which is 100% of his losses overall. And then looking at his last 4 fights, he is 4-0 in his last 4, and you're going to notice both these guys share similar opponents who they've both been able to get over. That is Eric Silva and Con Offley. Now, hot take probably, because there's a lot of people I think that have jumped on the Mairon Santos hype train. I was on the hype train, especially after his big win against Con Offley when he got the contract into the UFC from Ultimate Fighter. But I do believe he lost against Francis Marshall. Guys, I do. I don't care what way you swing it. Francis Marshall hurt Mairon Santos. He dropped him and hurt him more in that fight. Even though if you want to say damage-wise, like there was maybe more blood or whatever, but he really hurt Mairon Santos badly in that matchup. And somehow he was able to get the win. So shout out to Mairon Santos there. But guys, in this matchup, it's a fun one. And I think that Muhammad Naimov has the perfect style to completely nullify what Mairon Santos brings. I don't like that Mairon Santos has 0 submissions on his record. And then when you consider 0 submissions, but he has so many fights where he just kind of gets on top of guys and lays there, that's a little bit like annoying and worrisome to me, because he's just basically taking guys down to hold them, not to finish them. And I don't like that. But Muhammad Naimov's a grappler in his own right. And honestly, guys, I can see Naimov pushing the pace on the feet. Obviously, Santos is probably likely to have the better chance of, catching Muhammad Naimov with some big shots. But I think Muhammad Naimov is going to have a unique style and ability to close the distance, get Mairon Santos on the back foot, and potentially, sink in those takedowns. And also not just sink in the takedown, but while Santos is kind of trying to shake it off, I could see Naimov using that chain grappling to get Santos to the ground. I actually can see Naimov getting Santos in a submission potentially and getting a win by way of submission. But ultimately, the way I see it going, if Mairon Santos isn't able to KO Muhammad Naimov or land big shots, I just see Naimov kind of weathering the storm, landing shots of his own, and really just outvoluming and getting a win by way of decision. It's a close one to pick, but guys, like I said, I'm not sold on Santos yet. I just feel like he's shown some holes where it's like, I think certain fighters like Naimov, who's kind of gone out there and he's bested some of these up and coming guys that are, prime for potentially, being prospects. He goes out there and just his game plan and his skill sets are able to kind of nullify that of some of these prospects. I think he's going to have a bit of that age. He's a bit taller here too. I do think Santos can win the fight, but I am going to pick Muhammad Naimov winning by way of decision. That is going to be my final pick for this one. All right, guys, fight number 2 on the card. We got Mansur Abdul-Malik versus Antonio Trocolli. I feel like Trocolli was dating Mackenzie Dern, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's the one that got all up in arms with Bobby Green. But taking a look at this matchup, guys, kind of feels like a lamb out to slaughter, as much as I hate to say it. But you got Abdul-Malik, 28 years old, 6'2" with a 79.5-inch reach, 8-0 as a professional, 2-0 in the UFC. He's got 7 wins by KO, which is 88% of his wins. 1 win by submission, 13% of his wins. And then 0 decision wins. So he's got a 100% finish rate, 0 losses. His last 4 fights, obviously, he's won all of them. Now, Mansur Abdul-Malik, guys, although very powerful, I do think he has a style where at some point he's going to get a nice, either a full-on fraud check or just he's going to get checked by somebody, because in these fights, even against Nick Klein landed that spinning elbow and almost KO'd Mansur Abdul-Malik, but he's able to hang in there and then land his shots and find the finish. But I do think that at some point he's going to run up against somebody who is able to, put him out based on his fighting style. I've seen him get caught quite a bit. Even Brundage was catching him in their fight, which was a win, but got turned to a no contest. Regardless, when we look at Antonio Trocolli, he's 35 years old. He's 6'5" with an 80-inch reach. So he's got the right size to be a formidable opponent here. But when we look at his record, 12-5 as a pro, 0-2 in the UFC. He's only got 3 wins by KO, so 25% KO rate. He's got 5 wins by submission, which is a 42% submission rate. 4 wins by decision, a 33% decision rate. 67% finishing rate overall. So Antonio Trocolli is not bad when you look at all those numbers. His losses, he's got 2 losses by KOs, is 40% of his losses. 1 loss by submissions, 20% of his losses. And then 2 losses by decisions, other 40% overall. I think the biggest thing with Antonio Trocolli, guys, is just although he's got that genetic gift of being 6'5" with an 80-inch reach, we have yet to see him pull it together in the UFC. Got, guillotine choked out by Tresean Gore, which is not a good look. Prior to that, a loss to Sharar Magomedov. I think he did a good job up until the finish, but we have not seen any success from him in this fight or in the UFC thus far. And guys, I think the writing's on the wall on this one. I think Mansur Abdul-Malik is primed to get a nice finish on the feet here. I would like to break down the strengths and weaknesses, but I just feel like when you consider the style of Trocolli and see how he's been able to be caught by previous opponents, I think Mansur Abdul-Malik is going to be able to find the chin early and just put him out cold with probably a right hand, just drop him, and then maybe even just land some nice ground and pound for good measure, as John Anik would say. I think Mansur Abdul-Malik wins this by a devastating first-round KO. That's my pick. All right, guys, fight number 3 on the card. We've got Ivo Aslan versus Ivo Baraniewski. So I apologize if I said that wrong. Ivo is coming over from Contender Series this past season. And guys, before I dive into the breakdown of these guys, just want to say, if you haven't seen it, I think it was the Contender Series episode that happened on September 17th. Baraniewski goes out there against Muhammad Ali, and guys, the commentators were straight up disrespecting Baraniewski. They were talking about Ali, at least from what I saw. They were talking about Ali the entire time, about how great he is and all this stuff. The first exchange, Baraniewski lands an overhand right and starches this dude out cold. So he has a next level type of power that I don't think anybody expected. Diving into the matchup, we got Ivo Aslan, 29 years old, 6'3" with a 77.5-inch reach. Aslan's got 14-3 professional record. He's 2-2 in the UFC. He got 14 wins by KO, a 100% KO rate. I've never seen that. I've never seen that. So shout out to Ivo Aslan. That's fucking sick. I think he's also a 96 baby like myself. So shout out to Aslan. 100% finish rate. You made it very easy for me to just go through this. When we take a look at his losses, got 3 losses. 2 of them came by way of submission. 67% submission loss rate, and then 1 by decision, which is 33% of his losses overall. Now, unfortunately, guys, looks like the coloring got fucked up here, but technically we should have a green, red, because in the last 4, Ivo Aslan's 2-2. Lost to Billy Elikana, which was a lackluster fight through and through, but Elikana just was more active. And then he lost to Ian Cutelaba, which was a submission loss. Prior to that, he got a win over Rafael Cerqueira, and then a win over Anton Turkalj, which was a rematch. Turkalj actually previously beat Ivo Aslan. So Ivo Aslan, I think, started off strong in the UFC, guys, and I don't know what's happened, but as of recent, we just haven't seen the same type of finishing ability from him, especially that aggressive finishing ability on the feet. Now, Baraniewski, as I mentioned, off a Contender Series, he's 26 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73.5-inch reach. So he's going to have a significant height and reach disadvantage against Ivo Aslan, but I think given that he's 6-0 at light heavyweight, something he's used to. And when I say that he's 6-0 as a pro, he's got 0 fights in the UFC because he's coming off Contender Series. Ivo, 4 wins by way of KO, a 67% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, a 33% submission rate, and 0 wins by decision because he's got a 100% finishing rate. So this is 2 guys with utmost finishing ability, right? And when we look at the last 4 fights for Ivo, like I said, 4-0, undefeated, and these are all kind of a mix of KOs or submissions. So when I take a look at both of these guys, their styles, I think Ivo Aslan, the biggest key to victory for him is he needs to bring out the vintage Ivo Aslan that got him to this dance, right? He's got to be very forward, pressure heavy, looks to cut off the cage, walk down Baraniewski, and just try to land those big combinations, because his best bet here, guys, is landing a big shot where he hurts Baraniewski and is able to finish the fight, whether it be from a clean one-shot TKO or potentially drops Baraniewski and then lands some heavy ground and pound. Those are the only keys to victory I see Ibo Aslan having in this matchup? Just given his style, given how he fights. I think when things go to decisions, he tends to be a bit lackluster or just lack offense or volume, and we see him lose, right? And so I think Ibo Aslan, just the biggest thing is have that power boxing, especially if they get into the pocket. I also think he needs to stay forward on the forward pressure, cut the cage off, have the takedown defense, right, in case Baraniewski's looking to get things to the ground, and ultimately just try to land the big shots that can get Baraniewski out of there. I don't want to see Ibo Aslan go for like points because I think that style doesn't fit him well. I think he needs to try to find the KO on the feet. That is his best bet, in my opinion. When I take a look at Ivo Baraniewski, I think the benefit for him here, being the smaller fighter, is he's going to be able to use that very mobile and quick style that he has. I think he needs to start off very early with that consistent footwork, staying on the outside of the shots that Ibo Aslan's going to have, but he doesn't want to stay too far outside because he's going to have, like I said, that reach and height disadvantage. So I want to see him just be smart about how he moves, and I think the biggest thing is maybe landing some heavy calf kicks from Baraniewski off the rip is going to be very important here. It's going to stop Ibo Aslan from being able to, have that forward pressure and cutting off the cage if he's able to take the legs out. I mean, I think also what I want to see Baraniewski do is consistently switch up those attacks, right? So if he's going to go to the leg a few times, I want to see him consistently also throw some shots to the head. He's got power of his own, so try to land when he sees openings on the feet, get Ibo Aslan kind of thinking and questioning. But when you consider the fact that Baraniewski has some ground game to bring to this fight, also has several submissions, I think has the potential to catch Ibo Aslan with a big shot, but I think that big shot is likely to come if Baraniewski's staying consistent on flaunting takedowns, right? Feinting that he's going to go for the leg, maybe throwing a big overhand, right? So I think he needs to just mix in that style that he always tends to bring. And also, if he sees the opportunity to get the grappling going and getting Ibo to the floor, go for it, and then look for the submission. I can see Ivo Baraniewski finishing this fight in round one by way of KO, or I would say even by way of submission if he's able to hurt or even feint a punch and then grab up the legs and take Ibo down. I just see Ivo Baraniewski, although he has a significant disadvantage in this fight, being that Ibo Aslan hasn't fought the best of the best, but he's been in the UFC. He's going to have that UFC experience, and he's going to have the size advantage. I think that Ibo Aslan has a chance to get a decision win or maybe even knocking out Ivo Baraniewski. I just think the fact that Baraniewski has the ability to grapple and submit is going to pay a lot of dividends for him in this matchup. So ultimately, I'm going to go Ivo getting the win, but shout out to Ibo Aslan. All right, guys, fight number 4 on the card. We got Edson Barboza versus Jalin Turner. This is going to be a very fun fight. Now, I know Jalin Turner was retired for all of, he retired for like 6 months, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And you know what? When he retired, he was so sure he was going to retire for good. I'm so happy he didn't, because this guy's 30 years old. He's only a year older than I am. And he's already had so much success in the UFC. Now, recently he's had a few difficult run-ins, but it sounds like now he is in the right headspace. Jalin Turner is a guy who has all the skills to be a contender, okay? So I'm happy he didn't retire officially. So when we look at this matchup, guys, Barboza's, obviously at the end of his rope. He's 39 years old, 5'11" with a 75-inch reach, a 24-13 professional record. 18-13 in the UFC. It's sad because, guys, Barboza was once a formidable challenger or contender for the title, and now we've seen quite the skid, if you will. Now, obviously, he's 2-2 in his last 4, but we'll get to that. Barboza's got 13 wins by way of KO, a 54% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, an 8% submission rate, 9 wins by way of decision, a 38% decision rate, giving Barboza a 63% finishing rate. You love to see that in the lightweight division, especially for a guy who's been there for as long as Barboza. Now, he hasn't always been in the lightweight, featherweight too, but in the UFC, I'm saying. And it's even better for Barboza when you consider that, because a lot of that percentage is driven by his performances at a lower weight class, which as you go down in weight class, you tend to see drop-offs of finishing rate. So really solid for Barboza there. When we look at his losses, he's got 4 losses by KO. It's about a 31% KO loss rate. 2 losses by submission, about a 15% submission loss rate, and then 7 losses by decision, which is 54% of his losses overall. Last 4 fights, Barboza's 2-2, got too, I think the loss to Drakkar Klose is much worse than that of Lerone Murphy, because I think Lerone Murphy was a bit competitive, but Lerone Murphy was able to just, win the fight kind of wherever it needed to go. Prior to that, some big wins over Sadiq Youssef and Billy Quarantillo. But when we look at his opponent, Jalin Turner, like I said, although has had some, mishaps in the recent fights, Jalin Turner's a dog. 30 years old, 6'3" as a lightweight. It is absolutely terrifying. Absolutely. I have no fucking idea how Jalin Turner makes this weight, guys. I am 6'4", and I know no one's asked, but I'm 6'4", and the lowest I've weighed as an adult, like from the time I've been 18 to this day, which is 29, I think the lowest I've ever weighed was, I want to say 179 pounds. And I try to work out, but I'm not hitting weights. Like I'm doing like what your typical, like somewhat active American is doing, right? So for Jalin Turner to be, an inch shorter than me, but fucking dropping to 155 and being as yoked as he is, I fucking don't even understand how he does it, but that's beyond me. So Jalin Turner's got a 75.5-inch reach. He's 14-9 as a pro, 7-6 in the UFC. Turner's got 10 wins by way of KO, a 71% KO rate, 4 wins by submission, a 29% submission rate, 0 wins by decision, 100% finish rate. This is like, dude, this card is full of fighters that have like crazy finishing rates, especially for these lower weight classes. When we look at his losses, Jalin Turner's lost 4 times by KO. It's about a 44% KO loss rate. 1 loss by submission, which is 11% of his losses overall. And then 4 losses by decision. It's another 44% there. And then taking a look at his last 4 fights, like I said, not a lot of success here. I had a very close fight with Dan Hooker. I think Dan Hooker just was not going out and found a way to win by decision. I think he laid it on. Jalin Turner had a very good first round, and then as the fight went on, I think Dan Hooker really poured it on. He got a win over King Green where he almost killed him, which hindsight, right? But he has that fight against King Green, goes into Renato Moicano at UFC 300, which I got to see live. I always drop that little plug for you guys. I'm sure you guys fucking hate hearing that at this point. But up against Renato Moicano, he literally drops Moicano to a point where you would think it's over. But Moicano stays like somewhat conscious, and Herb Dean doesn't call it off. And what do you know? The tide switch very quickly into the next round, where Renato then gets Jalin down and beats the hell out of him. And then he lost to Ignacio Bahamondes. So the one thing I worry about, guys, before we dive into the strengths and weaknesses and things of that nature, is that Jalin Turner has gone on the record to say that after the King Green fight, he literally felt so bad because he almost like killed Bobby with those extra shots. That is actually what stopped him from finishing Renato Moicano. And I worry about that because it's like, I understand where he's coming from. And as someone who I've said in other videos, like, I'm not a fighter. I wouldn't be able to do what he does. Like, I couldn't step into the cage regardless. But specifically, like, I feel like if I hit somebody and hurt them, I would not want to keep punching them because I'm just not, I don't want to fucking like, you got to have the killer inside you. And I know I don't. So that's what I kind of worry about with Jalin Turner, because if he's struggling with that, it could mean him losing an opportunity or losing a fight that, honestly, guys, against Renato Moicano, if he didn't have that feeling and he had the killer switch, Renato Moicano's flatlined. Like, there's no way Renato recovers from that. Because if you guys remember, he knocked Renato down and then walked away. Like, he walked off. So that's just what I want to talk about before we dive into the strengths and stuff like that. Now, taking a look at these guys, I think Edson Barboza, guys, is one of these legends of the sport. Just an absolute beast when it comes to his kickboxing ability. Some of the best leg kicks, some of the best head kicks. We saw the spinning wheel kick he got way back in his youth in the UFC. But I think that, guys, I want to break this down, and honestly, the best key to victory for Edson Barboza at this point, and I'm basing this off of previous performances. Guys, Edson Barboza was almost getting KO'd by Drakkar Klose, a guy who is not known for having punching power in his hands. Like, he's not a guy who just flatline KOs people with his hands. Drakkar Klose came extremely close to knocking Barboza out several times. Like, Barboza, every connection looked like it was going to drop him. So in this fight, the key to victory for Barboza is trying to land and stay away from Jalin Turner. Just stay the fuck away from Turner. Because I feel, when I take a look at Jalin Turner's keys to victory, if Jalin Turner can go out there, use his height, use his pressure and his reach, use that aggression we've seen him have, if he catches Barboza, I think he flatline KOs him, and that is my honest opinion. And guys, honestly, that is what I think is going to happen. I think that if you consider the last fight with Drakkar Klose, now you could say Barboza's worried about the takedown, sure thing. But he has to worry about that here too, because Jalin Turner's no slouch on the ground. He's also gotten a lot of training in with some of these other guys like Ian Gary and guys who know how to grapple. And he's always got the striking threat. I'm sorry, I love Barboza as much as the next guy. I think Jalin Turner is going to win this fight. And I think he's going to win by a brutal KO in round 1. That is what I'm going to say. And I think Edson Barboza should probably retire, because, he's getting up there in age. It seemed that the weight cuts are definitely doing him in, because Drakkar Klose almost KO'd him like 4 times. I just think Jalin Turner's got this one in the bag, guys, but I could be wrong. And I've been wrong, so we'll see what happens. Fight number 5, we've got the return of Marvin Vettori versus the Hulk Brunno Ferreira. Now, this matchup's kind of fun, guys, where he's 32 years old, 6 feet tall with a 74-inch reach. 19-8 as a pro, 9-7 in the UFC. People forget, man. Marvin Vettori previously fought for the title a few years back, 2021, against Israel Adesanya. Vettori's got 2 wins by way of KO, an 11% KO rate, 9 wins by way of submission, a 47% submission rate, 8 wins by way of decision, a 42% decision rate, giving Vettori a 58% finishing rate overall. Marvin Vettori's got a fucking cinder block head, never been KO'd, never been submitted, only lost by way of decisions. He's got 8 losses by way of decision. His last 4 fights, unfortunately for him, he is 1-3. He got a win over Roman Dolidze a few years back. Prior to that, or after that, he's lost to Jared Cannonier, Roman Dolidze, and Brendan Allen, respectively. Now, one thing I'm going to call out, Marvin Vettori, guys, has some sneaky boxing skill, okay? A lot of people like to shit on him and say he's not that good at it on the feet, but what we've noticed, like, obviously he lost to Jared Cannonier, where, like, somehow he was hit by shots that would kill a horse and he stayed standing, but he did actually stumble and hurt Jared Cannonier a few times in that fight, where I'm like, dude, if Jared Cannonier gets KO'd by Vettori, like, what fucking timeline are we living in? But anyways, Vettori's got some good hands, and honestly, I don't know when he stopped, but when he used to fight Adesanya, guys, like for the title, he was always going for takedowns, very wrestling heavy style. We saw that against like Kevin Holland when he fought Kevin Holland, I think, and then also Paulo Costa. But really, like, his recent fights, he has not done that. So definitely probably looking to keep things standing based on that. But when we look at Brunno Ferreira, although like we've barely seen Brunno Ferreira compared to that of Vettori in the UFC, somehow Ferreira's older. He's 33 years old. He's 5'10", and he's got a 72-inch reach. So he's actually going to have a bit of a size disadvantage in this matchup. Ferreira is 14-2 as a pro, 5-2 in the UFC. He's got 9 wins by way of KO, a 64% KO rate, 5 wins by way of submission, a 36% submission rate, and then 0 wins by way of decision. So Brunno Ferreira is bringing in a 100% finishing rate. You gotta fucking love it. When we take a look at his losses, the Hulk has lost by KO and by sub, so 50% in each of those categories. His last 4 fights, he is 3-1. So got a win over Dustin Stoltzfus, where Stoltzfus almost got the KO win, which was nuts, but then he does a fucking spinning elbow and just sends him to the ether. And then he loses to Abus Magomedov, which I believe he like hurt Abus, and then Abus choked him out or got an armbar. And then he got 2 back-to-back wins by way of submission over Armin Petrosian and Jackson McVeigh. Taking a look at both Marvin Vettori and Brunno Ferreira's styles and the keys to victory, I do think, guys, when you take a look at Marvin Vettori, the amount of experience he's had, obviously, he had some personal things, his brother passing, which is super sad. Once again, sorry to hear that, Marvin. I hope you're all right, bro. I was hoping Marvin would go out there and get a win over Brendan Allen, and it was a fun scrap, but I just think that Marvin Vettori sometimes with that boxing, he's tricky, but once guys figure him out, it can be hard for him to kind of find success. But in this fight, I think a big thing for Marvin is having the high guard, making sure he is cognizant of the power coming his way when Brunno's in there and standing across from him, because Brunno can throw some bombs. So he's got to have a high guard and just use his very tricky southpaw boxing that I think he's been able to have success against a lot of fighters with, right? He's able to land a lot of different shots that you wouldn't really expect, especially someone with more of like a wrestling acumen like Marvin Vettori. And I think if he can do that, walk Ferreira down, but just use that boxing, right? Use the southpaw boxing. And then also I want to see Marvin Vettori really incorporate the clinch in the wrestling when he can, but I don't want to see him put himself in a bad spot where somehow Ferreira just, because I think Ferreira's got some judo in his background, so he doesn't want to get caught up in like a judo throw. So I think if Marvin can do his best to just land with volume often and have Ferreira on the back foot, that is going to be his main key to success. I don't necessarily see Vettori getting a finish, but I think if he's able to stay successful in keeping Ferreira on the back foot, landing with volume, landing often, I can see Vettori actually edging out a decision. Now, on the side of Ferreira, he's got that explosive power, and he's got it very early in the fight, right? This is why his nickname's the Hulk. He's got that blitzkrieg offense where he just goes forward, looks to land those big shots, and tries to hurt his opponent, tries to put him out cold. So in this matchup, I would love to see that from him. I don't want to see him get too overzealous on the finish, though, because he is going up against a guy who no one's been able to finish. Vettori is just a very stubborn, thick-headed Italian guy he's not going to be able to just get finished off the bat. Now, I want to see Brunno be calculated, but still have that blitzkrieg power early on. Try to land a big shot. You never know. At some point, the chin's got to go. We saw Max Holloway never get KO'd, and then he got KO'd by Topuria. So I think that Vettori has the potential to get KO'd because of the amount of damage he's taken. And Vettori's a weird guy because he's been in the UFC for so long that you would think he's 36 or 37. The guy's 32 years old. So that still, though, although his age says otherwise, he has a lot more miles, especially at the highest level of the game in the UFC. I would like to see the Hulk utilize some feints, feinting into overhands, using uppercuts. I think he needs to get Vettori to kind of get the guard straight up like this so he can loop around with those hooks or even like a very solid and powerful overhand. And I think another thing that I would like to see Brunno Ferreira utilize is, should Vettori close the distance, get him into like a clinching situation or a grappling situation, I would like to see Brunno Ferreira try to utilize some of the judo techniques that he has and maybe get some type of judo throw where he can get Marvin Vettori down to the ground. It's going to be a difficult thing to do because of the way where he's built and also that wrestling acumen. But I would like to see, if Brunno Ferreira does get taken down, I want to see the Brunno Ferreira who is he's just not accepting of the ground positions, right? Want to see him try to scramble or even go for submission attempts, because one thing that Brunno Ferreira has been able to do is, like, when guys get him to the ground, he's been very good about locking up and cinching up different types of submission threats or submission attacks. We saw this in his last 2 outings. So ultimately, guys, I do think Vettori has every chance to potentially win this matchup, just given his experience, given his durability. I just think that Brunno Ferreira is just an absolute tank to deal with. He's a finisher through and through. I see Brunno Ferreira getting the win here, guys. I don't see him finishing Vettori because Vettori is not a guy that is just, like, when you look at the amount of guys he's fought that are so skilled and they haven't been able to finish him, I just see Brunno Ferreira potentially landing the bigger and more damaging shots. If he's able to keep his gas tank from start to finish, I see Brunno Ferreira getting a win by way of decision. But Vettori, guys, has every opportunity to get a win here. Like, when you consider the styles, you consider the finishing rate of Brunno Ferreira. If Marvin Vettori is able to survive with durability early on, he has the potential to really steal later rounds, especially if Brunno Ferreira is completely run out of gas. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about this, but I do feel like Brunno Ferreira will have the skills to land the big shots and maybe hurt Vettori and get him in a bad position. Ultimately, probably, grinding this out. Maybe it's like a Brunno Ferreira wins the first and third or the first and second, and then Marvin kind of comes on late in the fight and gets a late round. But ultimately, I see Brunno Ferreira getting the nod by way of decision. Fight number 6. This is another fun lightweight matchup that's going to be on this card. And guys, lightweight, the UFC must be looking to get things moving just outside the rankings at lightweight, and as they fucking should be. Now we've got Fares Ziam versus Nazim Sadikov, 2 of my favorite lightweights, specifically Nazim Sadikov. He's just a fucking dog when he goes out there, but you got to love Fares Ziam. He's got that huge knee that he got over Matt Frivola, which was beautiful. Now, taking a look at both these guys, Fares Ziam's a bit of a weird guy in this lightweight division. Why is he weird? Well, he's young. He's 28 years old. He's 6'1" as a lightweight, which is fucking nuts. He's taller than Marvin Vettori, okay? 75-inch reach, and then 17-4 as a pro, 7-2 in the UFC. Fares Ziam's got he's got 5 wins by way of KO, a 29% KO rate, 5 wins by way of submission, a 29% submission rate, 7 wins by way of decision, a 41% decision rate, giving Fares Ziam a 59% finishing rate overall. When we take a look at Fares Ziam's losses, he's got 3 losses by way of submission, which is 75% overall, and then 1 loss by way of decision, the other quarter of his losses, so 25% there. Last 4 fights for Fares Ziam, been very successful. He's 4-0 in his last 4 over some solid talent. You got Jai Herbert, you got Claudio Puelles, you got Matt Fervola, which was a finish, and then Mike Davis. So Fares Ziam has shown he's got another level of skills, right? Especially beating a Mike Davis, who's very tricky to get a win over in the UFC. Now, going up against a formidable opponent, he's got the Black Wolf, Nazim Sadykhov, 31 years old, 5'10", 69-inch reach, 11-1 as a professional, 4-0 in the UFC. Sadykhov's got 8 wins by way of KO, 73% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, an 18% submission rate, 1 win by way of decision, a 9% decision rate, giving my boy Nazim Sadykhov a 91% finishing rate overall. Fucking love to see it, guys. I'm going to say it every time. Now, Nazim Sadykhov has only had 1 loss in his career, and that came by way of submission. So he's got 100% of his losses in the submission category. When we take a look at his last 4, he had a big win over Terrence McKinney. I think he got if I'm not mistaken, I think he KO'd Terrence McKinney. Then he has a draw with Vyacheslav Borshev, which, guys, I love Sadykhov, but that is I question that one because Vyacheslav's a good fighter, but I feel like every other matchup I've seen him in, he kind of just gets steamrolled, and to have a draw there, it's a bit worrisome, right? Now, after that, he goes out there and he gets a first-round finish over Ismail Bonfim. Now, that was, some might say, controversial because he threw a head kick that just split the head open of Ismail Bonfim, but I think that Nazim Sadykhov threw that head kick with a lot of intention behind it, and he showed us, I think, that Ismail Bonfim ain't that guy, right? Like, that's, in my opinion, it just is what it is. But he goes out there in his hometown of Azerbaijan, and he has a fucking absolute war with Nicholas Mata. Now, that one's a bit worrisome too, but Nick Mata has shown that to have some power in the hands, right? He has shown to have some skills there in his career, but you worry about it because it's like you've seen Nick Mata kind of get steamrolled or flatlined, like, you know, by Manuel Torres and other fighters, but Sadykhov gets hurt and just finds a way to just grit down in his hometown while getting just pieced up by like 50 punches. Then he suddenly flips the script and he finds the finish on Nicholas Mata, shows him that he's the Black Wolf. Fucking fantastic fight. One of my favorites of this year, guys. If you haven't seen Nazim Sadykhov versus Nicholas Mata, go fucking watch it right now. So in this matchup, guys, it's a fun one. You've got Fares Ziam. He's got a very long-range kickboxing style. So I think for the keys of victory for Ziam is just staying tall, utilizing his jab and his front kicks. Also use those low kicks to keep Nazim kind of at the end of his punches and the end of his range. If he can stay elusive there, he's going to have a significant reach advantage, a 6-inch reach advantage, which means Ziam should be able to realistically pick Nazim apart from that perspective, right? He's going to have that long jab. I think the footwork and resets will be very important too. Ziam needs to just make sure he's continuously circling off the cage. He needs to make sure he's circling away from the power hand of Sadykhov. Sadykhov's got some fucking grit and power in his hands and in his feet. So I think he doesn't want to get stuck against the fence with Sadykhov because that is where Sadykhov's likely to shine. And also just, you know, doesn't want to, I think, be in these boxing exchanges, you know, specifically be within range or within the pocket with Nazim Sadykhov, because I think that type of fight is going to favor Sadykhov. So staying away from that and also having a very strong first layer of takedown defense and then get those quick underhooks and fast breaks to get out of any grappling exchanges Sadykhov may try to bring, because Sadykhov does have exposure and training to not only, you know, working with Merab, a very close friend of Merab's, but also working with Ray Longo and Matt Serra. He's going to have some of those grappling chops, especially from a submission ability, that could be the outlier here, taking a look at this matchup overall. Sadykhov And his keys to victory, guys, I think he needs to do his best to stay out of danger when at range with Ziam. I think he needs to do his best to, pick his shots while at range and maybe catch Ziam when Ziam's, either overplanting or overthrowing, and just do his best to kind of walk Ziam down, break that distance, get inside the reach, and then work his boxing combinations, especially in the pocket. If he can get into the pocket with Ziam, this is going to be a very fun fight, and it's also likely going to be a fight where Sadiqov catches the chin and hurts a guy like Ziam, especially being that Ziam's a bit bigger for this division. Could be a tough weight cut where Sadiqov has the ability to potentially catch him inside and put him out cold. But I also think mixing in the cage wrestling and clinch control is going to be a key element to Sadiqov's performance, because he's going to want Ziam to have that threat of, oh shit, this guy could take me down. This guy does have good ground game. He doesn't want to make this just a straight up kickboxing match, because he is at a disadvantage when it comes to him being, 6 inch less in reach, smaller in height. I think he needs to just make sure Ziam is not thinking this is just a kickboxing match. He's got to mix in the grappling, even if it's just to feint it. And then I think also keep the cardio and durability in the forefront, right? Like, he has a very good durability. We saw that in his last matchup against Mota. I just don't want to see him get into like crazy firefights off the rip. I want to see Sadiqov kind of ease his way into that, find that range, and once he gets into the pocket, then he can start to kind of unload and unleash. But overall, guys, I think this fight is so fun. I think Ziam has really proven to me at least. I saw him get tapped out by Terrence McKinney, and now he's on a fucking tear. So Ziam, being that he's the taller guy, has a lot of opportunities to potentially win this fight. But I have to go with Nazim Sadiqov off the fact that I feel like Sadiqov has not only a killer's instinct when he's in there, he just has a very fun fighting style, and also a very technically sound fighting style. Like the way he was able to land that question mark kick that split open the head of Bonfim, the way he was able to layer in those punches and the combinations that end up finishing Nicholas Mauda. I just think that Sadiqov, when the going gets tough, he's there for the fight until you put him out on his shield. I mean, I feel like he is likely to out-grit and find the chin of Ferreira. I could see him actually KOing Ferreira probably in round 2. That is going to be my pick overall. Fight number 7 on the card, we got the return of Maycee Barber, and she is going up against a surging contender herself in Karine Silva. So Maycee Barber, 27 years old, 5'6", 65-inch reach, a 14-2 professional record, 9-2 in the UFC. Just a quick note, guys. When I was really getting into UFC, it started like really back in 2019. And I just remember Maycee Barber on the come up, like especially 2020, right before COVID. They were just talking about her. It's crazy to see how much things have changed, right? She, it's been about 5 years since that. And obviously Maycee Barber's had a lot of success, but also a lot of things, happening outside the cage too. Maycee's got 6 wins by way of KO, a 43% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, so a 14% submission rate, 6 wins by decision, a 43% decision rate, giving Maycee Barber a 57% finishing rate, which, guys, that is solid for this weight class. And I know it's not going to show when we look at her opponent, but if you look at other women in this weight class, it is not common to have that high of a finishing rate. So shout out to Maycee. Now, when we take a look at Maycee's losses, she's got 2 losses. Both of them came by way of decision. One of those being, I think, against Miranda Maverick. If I remember correctly, she tore her ACL or of some sort, something in the knee against an opponent, which I think it was Miranda Maverick, which was one of her losses. And then the other loss, I'm not exactly, I can't remember specifically, because I think since then, Maycee's been pretty successful. Like, for instance, her last 4 fights, 4-0, got a win over Jessica Ai, Andrea Lee, Amanda Hebas, and Caitlin Sirmanara, formerly Chukagian. Now, Karine Silva, on the other hand, 31 years old, 5'5" with a 67-inch reach. She's going to be a little bit smaller, but have a little bit more of a reach advantage here. Silva's 19-5 as a pro, 5-1 in the UFC. She's got 8 wins by way of KO, a 42% KO rate, 9 wins by way of submission, a 47% submission rate, and then 2 wins by way of decision, an 11% decision rate. An 89% finishing rate for Karine Silva, which is absolutely bonkers for this division. When we take a look at Karine Silva's losses, she's got 1 loss by way of KO, a 20% KO loss rate, 2 losses by way of submission, a 40% submission loss rate, and then 2 losses by way of decision, a 40% decision loss rate. Her last 4 fights, she is 3-1, not a big, obviously Viviane Araujo is a good and solid fighter, but I don't know. This fight happening not just about a year ago, it's a bit worrisome for me. And, she lost that in 2024, I think, in the Madison Square Garden card, if I'm not mistaken. So why don't we dive into their strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory? So keys to victory, guys, for Maycee Barber. She is what I would say about Maycee Barber, guys, is that the way she fights is very much just like wherever I can win the fight, I'm going to try. And what I like about that, although it doesn't suggest in her actual, finish amount, right? She has 50% finishing rate or something like that. 58%, I think it was. But what I've noticed from Maycee Barber, when she's in there, she does always look to fucking damage her opponents in any way possible. And it's something different that you just don't see a lot in I'm not trying to, completely negate or talk down on the women's divisions, but one thing that you see in Maycee Barber, she has like that killer mentality and wanting to hurt her opponents however she can and hurt them in the worst way possible. You don't see that a lot in all of the different women fighters, that at least from what I've been exposed to. Now, a lot of them do have that killer switch, and I think Maycee Barber has that. And I think so in this fight, her main thing is just going to be utilizing her pressure and clinch work, and then just trying to make this a dog fight, like make it a dirty fight with Karine Silva, land some big shots, and just, I think early in the fight, Maycee needs to get that respect from Karine Silva, because it's going to slow down Karine Silva's ability to look for strikes in the feet, and then also slow down or negate the grappling altogether. I do think that if Maycee's able to, off the bat, utilize that pressure, utilize that killer instinct, try to land some big shots on the feet, and then also utilize her ability to get top control on Karine Silva, if she's able to get her down to the ground and utilize a clinch position to get Karine Silva to the ground, I think that could be a very solid way for Maycee to just establish control. And then just also, continuously use that cardio and pace that Maycee's been able to show in a lot of her showings in the UFC. Obviously trains in elevation. So I think Maycee Barber, if she's able to just kind of have a typical Maycee Barber performance, going out there, landing big shots in the feet, making her opponents pay by countering, and then also grabbing up that clinch, using her strength to just overpower Karine Silva in those aspects. I can see her getting a win by utilizing all of that in one, and just getting a win, likely by way of decision. But when I take a look at Karine Silva, I think that Karine Silva, knowing her finishing rate, knowing she's got that killer instinct, I think that keys to victory for her would be to welcome some scrambles, welcome some of that grappling or forward offense of Maycee Barber, and look to counter and find those openings, make Maycee pay when kind of going in for those clinch exchanges, but then also welcome some of the wild scrambles and wild exchanges that Maycee Barber tends to bring, and then capitalize on that by utilizing her superior jiu-jitsu, right? If Karine Silva can catch Maycee in, going for some type of sloppy takedown, or potentially catch Maycee in a sloppy scramble where she's trying to get back to her feet, I think she can definitely catch her in some type of submission and potentially submit Maycee Barber. I think a big thing for Karine Silva too is going to be using those kicks and her counter ability at range, right? She's going to have a bit of a reach advantage. I think that she will be able to use those kicks and just land some offense at range. And then there's also, like I said, make Maycee pay. If Maycee's trying to close the distance, I think if she can utilize not only the kicks, but then also just use some of her boxing to land. But I don't want to see her stay too long within the distance of Maycee Barber, because that's going to give Maycee Barber a chance to latch up those clinch opportunities and then, start scoring with that. I think a big thing is Karine Silva just also continuously throwing out that submission threat to Maycee when Maycee tries to, get top control or tries to grapple into top control. I think if Karine Silva can throw up some strong submission attempts at first and just make Maycee kind of second guess being forward on the grappling, that could be a big help in her potentially getting a win here as well. But ultimately, guys, and although Maycee Barber's had a lot of stuff, I think, going on outside the cage, you do have to beg the question of, like, with her missing that fight against Blanchfield, I know some shit was going down. You do start to question, like, how that could affect her mentally, right? Coming back in and being out for a while. And, like, she was about to fight Blanchfield, had a seizure, and the fight gets called off, like, you have to start to question, like, is this going to be a build-up for Maycee Barber where potentially, that gets to her head mentally, like, is she ready for it, right? You have to bring all of that into the forefront here. I do think that Maycee Barber has kind of shown that she's a very strong competitor, very strong skill set. I feel like she has all the skills to bring a solid fight to Karine Silva and ultimately get a win by way of decision. So that is the way I'm going to lean, but I wouldn't discredit Karine Silva being able to find her own finish. And then when you consider the mental aspects, Karine Silva is going to have a plus there over Maycee Barber, because I think Maycee Barber obviously has been going through some stuff outside the cage, but I am picking Maycee Barber. Not only is she the American, but I just think she is the better fighter, and I think she's got more grit. So let's go Maycee, get that W when it comes Saturday. All right, guys, fight number 8. This one is a straight-up banger between Terrence McKinney and Chris Duncan. So Terrence McKinney's 31 years old, 5'10", 73.5-inch reach, 17-7 as a professional, 7-4 in the UFC. McKinney's got 8 wins by way of KO, a 47% KO rate, 9 wins by way of submission, a 53% submission rate, 0 wins by way of decision. Terrence McKinney, 100% finishing rate at 155. That is fucking sick. You just gotta love that shit. Now, taking a look at Terrence McKinney's losses. 5 losses by way of KO, which is about a 72% or 71% of his losses overall. He's got 2 losses by way of submission, 29% overall, and he's never lost by way of decision. So Terrence McKinney says, fuck it, dude. I'm not paid by the hour here. I'm going in there to either finish or get finished, right? Last 4 fights for Mr. McKinney. He's got a 3-1 record with a win over Vyacheslav Borshet, a win over Damir Hadzovic, a loss to Esteban Ribovic, which was, that was like when he got head kick KO'd and was like smiling up against the cage. And then before that, a win over Brendan Marat. Now, his adversary here, Chris Duncan, one of the most slept-on guys. Like, Chris Duncan's a fucking beast, guys. He's 32 years old, 5'10", but a 72.5-inch reach, so 1 inch less than that of McKinney. Duncan's 14-2 as a pro and 5-1 in the UFC. He's got 7 wins by way of KO, a 50% KO rate, 3 wins by way of submission, a 21% submission rate, 4 wins by way of decision, a 29% decision rate. So even though it's down 100%, 71% finishing rate at 155 is still very solid from Chris Duncan. When we take a look at Chris Duncan's losses, he's lost 1 time by KO, 50% of his losses overall, and then 1 time by way of submission, which is another 50% of his losses there. Taking a look at Chris Duncan's last 4 fights, 3-1 in his last 4, similar to his opponent, but he's got wins, guys, over some, I think, better talent when you actually consider it comparatively to what Terrence McKinney has, right? He's got a win over Mateusz Robensky, who obviously, he ended up getting a win over Mincy Betts Oralby. I know that was a 155-pound fight, so a bit different there because Mincy Betts has gone to 170. But regardless, before that, he gets a big win over Jordan Vucenic, which happened back in March of this year when they fought in London. And then before that, a win over Balaji Oki, who obviously a lot of people were touting very highly coming into the UFC. And then prior to that, he lost to Manuel Torres, which has aged very well for Manuel. No pun intended there. But yeah, Chris Duncan, guys, one of those slept-on guys, and one of those guys that I've been trying to back, in a lot of fights. Now, when we break down strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory, that'll give you guys a little bit more lay of the land for why I'm picking the way I am. I think the keys to victory for Mr. Terrence McKinney, T-Rex, fast, explosive start like he always does. Just get on Duncan early with the speed, try to land. He's got a very solid left hand that is McKinney does. Also very good with, mixing in some of those things, like when he's able to mix in the flying knee, right? Now, I think in this matchup, it's going to be interesting because Terrence McKinney is not going to have a significant reach nor size advantage that he tends to have in the lightweight division. But I do think that Terrence McKinney may have the upper hand when it comes to athleticism. So I think if he's able to just go out there with that fast, explosive start, throw some shots on the feet, try to catch Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan did take, although he got a win over Rombetsky, he took a lot of damage in that fight too. So I think McKinney could exploit that by potentially catching Chris Duncan flush with a shot and maybe putting him out. But Another thing that he needs to have in this is he needs to be defensively aware as well. He is not going up against some pillow-handed puncher in Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan has been able to show an ability to create damage on his opponents or even put them out cold. I remember a specific matchup for Chris Duncan. I think he beat Charlie Campbell, I think it is, on Contender Series, if I'm not mistaken, and this might have been a couple years ago, but he was going in there, and Charlie Campbell was like this guy that everybody's touting, like he has got the KO, the KO power, the hands to you. Basically, they were just talking like this guy is the next Muhammad Ali coming into this division, and I just remember Chris Duncan flatlining him and getting a KO, and like nobody expected it to happen. So I do think that Terrence McKinney needs to be very well aware that if he's unable to close the show with an early finish, he needs to just mitigate and manage gas, but then also manage that distance and his own defensive awareness. He doesn't want to get caught with punches or even like the elbow that was very on point for Chris Duncan in his last matchup. For Chris Duncan, on the other hand, I think keys to victory here, I think he's going to need to survive that early storm. McKinney's going to lay it on thick and hot. I don't know why I say it that way. It's a little sus, but McKinney's going to lay it on him, right? He's going to try to put those hands and those paws on him. And I think Chris Duncan needs to be very defensively aware off the rip. He needs to have the high guard, very tight defense, maybe look for openings, but don't prioritize landing your own offense just immediately. I think just stay defensively aware and wait for Terrence McKinney to potentially make a mistake. That is going to be a key to success for Chris Duncan, because if he's able to kind of wait out that storm, stay with the high and tight guard, just maybe find those shots when they're available and land a solid counter shot, which we've been able to see Terrence McKinney be put out before by stuff like that. But in addition to that, I think he needs to see and look for openings that could potentially allow him to get the upper hand from a grappling perspective. Now, I think that's what makes this fight very interesting is Terrence McKinney is not a slouch on the ground, has shown very high acumen when it comes to his ground game, same as Chris Duncan. So it's hard to say who's actually the better grappler going into this matchup. I think that's what makes this matchup fun is we're going to be able to kind of see out of these two guys at lightweight who just like to fucking bang, go out there and get finishes or just have bloody, damaging fights, who can stand the test of time, right? And get the W, whether it be mixing in the striking and grappling. I do think that one thing Chris Duncan offers up here is he has a very slick guillotine, someone who actually trains with Dustin Poirier, and he's actually been able to get it done with the guillotine a lot of times in his fights. I think that that's going to be something that Terrence McKinney needs to be very keen of. But Chris Duncan, for you, I think if he can see an opening for that guillotine, go ahead and latch it up and try to get the finish that way. He's shown success in getting that in previous fights, so I actually trust his ability there. But I also think just maintaining a solid pressure and attrition rate overall. Don't want to see Chris Duncan completely gas himself out. I think Terrence McKinney is live to be the fighter that if he's unable to find that finish or success early, McKinney's likely to fade much faster. It's just the nature of how he fights, and I think Chris Duncan will be able to capitalize on that. So I think the best thing for Chris Duncan in this one is just staying safe early on, allowing Terrence McKinney to kind of come out with those big flurries, look for your shots when you can, and basically just give Terrence McKinney that chance to gas himself out. And then from there, it is Chris Duncan's fight. I think he could find a finish, whether it be, landing a big shot on the feet or even just getting a submission latched up on Terrence McKinney when Terrence McKinney's trying to shoot for something. Ultimately, guys, I love Terrence McKinney as a fighter. He's so fun to watch. One of my favorites. I worry in this matchup for him because I think Chris Duncan is another one of those, he's like an immovable force, right? He's not an easy guy to get out of there. And ultimately, I just feel like when I consider Terrence McKinney's schedule and resume, like he has been finished quite a bit, especially to the head. And I think if Chris Duncan's able to land like a head kick, which he's thrown in the past, or even just land a solid overhand, maybe even a straight shot, I think he has a higher chance of maybe dropping and hurting Terrence McKinney. And then he's got that killer in him too. So ultimately, guys, I love Terrence McKinney. I'm going to root for the American fighter to get a win, but I think Chris Duncan is likely to get it done. I see him finishing Terrence McKinney by round 2. I don't know if it's a sub or a KO, but I'll say a submission for Chris Duncan in round 2. All right, guys, fight number 9 on the card. We got Grant Dawson versus Manuel Torres, one of my favorite lightweights that we've had in this roster in a long time. Now, this is the featured prelim bout, so the final prelim bout of the current era of the UFC. Should be a very fun scrap, but let's dive into the details. We got Grant Dawson, 31 years old, 5'10", 72-inch reach. Grant Dawson is 23-2 as a professional, 11-1 in the UFC. Dawson's got 5 wins by way of KO, a 22% KO rate. 13 wins by way of submission, a 57% submission rate. 5 wins by way of decision, a 22% decision rate, giving Grant Dawson a 78% finishing rate overall, which is super solid. I feel like a lot of people have been, giving him shit saying he's boring, but he's got a lot of finishes. When we look at Grant Dawson's losses, he's only lost twice in his career, but both those losses came by way of KO, and that's a bit worrisome in this matchup. We'll get to that. Last 4 fights for Grant Dawson, he's got 3-1. He's got a win over Diego Ferreira, which is a big win and a solid test, right, when you consider power, right? Because we saw him just get his ass beat by Michael Johnson and then just put him out cold, right? So Ferreira's got that type of switch in those hands. Prior to that, a huge win over Rafa Garcia, who just beat one of the sleepers at lightweight, which is Jared Gordon. And then a win over Joe Selecki, which is a good win. Now, prior to that, a loss to King Green where, shit, guys, this is what has me worried. Like, he got jabbed by Bobby Green and KO'd, which is nuts, right? But Dawson's a great fighter, great wrestler. When we look at Manuel Torres, one of my favorites, guys, the bomb of an elbow this dude landed on Nick Mata was disgusting, and it was one of my favorite elbows of all time. It actually made one of my knockout videos that I did a while back in terms of like one of my favorite KOs. It was so brutal. And Manuel Torres is that guy. He fucking KO'd Drew Dober, which does not happen. Like, it happened twice. He's one of them. Torres is 30 years old, 5'10", 73.5-inch reach, 16-3 as a pro, 4-1 in the UFC. Torres has 8 wins by way of KO, a 50% KO rate, 7 wins by way of submission, a 44% submission rate, and 1 win by way of decision, a 6% decision rate, which gives this guy a 94% finishing rate. You love to see that shit, especially at lightweight. Manuel Torres has a few losses. As I mentioned, he's got 1 loss by way of KO, a 33% KO loss rate, and then 2 losses by way of submission, which is a 67% submission loss rate. He has never gone the distance in his losses nor in his wins, or won in his wins, but in losses, never lost by way of decision. Last 4 fights for Manuel Torres, he's got a 3-1 record as well. Big win over Drew Dober. Prior to that, he lost to Ignacio Bahamondes. Prior to that, a big win over Chris Duncan, who's also fighting on this card, and a big win over Nick Mata, as I mentioned. Taking a look at Grant Dawson and Manuel Torres, their keys to victory, I think Grant Dawson's key to victory here, guys, is just staying on top of that, staying with the clean striking on the feet where he's, kind of throwing the 1-2 out there. But he just needs to be early and often with that chain wrestling that he always brings to fights. Try to grab those single legs, double legs, get Manuel Torres against the cage if he can, so he can utilize that to his advantage. Get Manuel Torres to the ground and then utilize that heavy and that smothering top control Grant Dawson always brings, right? This is a typical grappler versus striker type matchup. I know that when you look at Manuel Torres and you see that he has a lot of wins by way of submission, it begs the question of, like, is this striker grappler or is this grappler? Manuel Torres is a striker first, going to look to really try to finish the fight on the feet, but he has the wrestling, or he has the jiu-jitsu to kind of layer in there should the going get tough and Grant Dawson gets him to the ground. I think that Grant Dawson's key to victory is staying away from any exchanges on the feet, knowing that he's been chinned. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, even though Torres is definitely a stronger puncher and has those lethal elbow attacks than like a Bobby Green. I think that Grant Dawson just, that could just be one of those moments where he just got, chinned, and it is what it is. But knowing that, I think I don't want to see him spend too much time exchanging on the feet with a guy like Manuel Torres, who's going to look to finish and land with a bomb, right? So Grant Dawson just got to keep that grappling pressure early and often, get Manuel down, and then get that top control and maybe go for a submission. But if not, just try to control Torres from top position on the ground. Keys to victory for Manuel Torres. He's got the early kill threat, guys. He needs to just try to land a fast, hard combo on Grant Dawson. And when I mean that, I mean in a way where he's not putting himself in danger in terms of being taken down easily, right? Don't want to see him throw like a kick and suddenly get caught up in a grappling exchange. And I also don't want to see Manuel Torres like prioritizing a guillotine or some other type of submission attack on Grant Dawson too much. I think that if he feels like he can lock it up, go for it. But you don't want to pull a Dustin Poirier here and just jump the guillotine or jump the gilly, as he calls it, every single time a takedown comes, because I do think that Grant Dawson has a high enough level of fight IQ and wrestling IQ to where he's going to be able to kind of stay safe in those exchanges, and then we'll just get top control, and this could be a grind them out type decision. I think if Manuel Torres can stay consistent with takedown defense and then not be overzealous about attacking submissions every time a takedown is clinched up, but rather be more prominent with trying to get back to the feet instead of attacking submissions on the ground. I think the big thing for Manuel Torres is just utilizing that long striking that he has, right? Using the jab, using the straight, using that elbow, and trying to maybe even catch Grant Dawson when he's crashing in for a takedown. But then also utilizing uppercuts and knees when Grant Dawson's kind of going for stuff. We saw this when he hurt Dober. Dober went for a leg, and Torres just fucking layered about 50 hammerfish shots to the side of the head. Beautiful work, and that's something that he needs to do here as well. Would also like to see him mix in some 12-6 elbows when the opportunity arises. I do think that, like I said, I don't want to see Torres try to show off any jiu-jitsu chops unless he's able to get it done. I just don't want to see him try it because I think Grant Dawson's going to be the better grappler. So I want to see him focus and prioritize the get-ups versus the grappling exchanges. In my opinion, guys, just knowing Grant Dawson, it's been out for a bit. He fought earlier this year. I just feel like Manuel Torres is prime for catching Grant Dawson with something that's got some mustard on it. And I just see Manuel Torres actually finishing this fight in either round 1 or round 2 by way of KO over Grant Dawson. That is going to be my final pick. But keep in mind, Dawson has every skill set available here to actually take this fight into his world and either finish Torres from submission or even just finish Torres by having that strong pressure and grappling control on the ground. All right, guys, fight number 10 on the card. Fight number 10 on the card, we've got the return of the legendary Polish power, Jan Blachowicz. And he is facing a rising up and coming contender in Bogdan Guskov, okay? Jan Blachowicz, a scrappy former champion veteran, is 42 years old, 6'2" with a 78-inch reach, 29-11 as a professional, 12-8 in the UFC. Jan Blachowicz has 9 wins by way of KO, a 31% KO rate, 9 wins by way of submission, a 31% submission rate, 11 wins by way of decision, a 62%, a 38% decision rate, giving Jan Blachowicz a 62% finishing rate overall. Taking a look at Jan's losses, he's got 2 losses by way of KO and 2 losses by way of submission. Both of those are about 19% in each category, or I guess 18% if we're rounding down, and then 7 losses by way of decision, which is 64% of his losses overall. Jan Blachowicz has not had the best last 4 fights when we take a look at this. This is ranging several years too, but last 4 fights he is 1-2-1, right? So he's got that win over Alexander Rakic, which happened back in, I believe, 2022. And then after that, later that year, he draws with Magomed Ankalaev in the title fight matchup, which is what ultimately allowed for Jamal Hill to win the strap at the start of 2023. And then after that, he loses a close split decision loss to Alex Pereira, which, you know, I don't know, guys. I think I could see Jan getting the nod there, but Jan just looked bad optically because he was so tired, right? It was a Salt Lake City fight. Definitely looked pretty washed at the end there, and not washed as a fighter, just washed at the end of the fight, I mean. And then Carlos Ulberg, which was a very lackluster, you know, obviously Ulberg just kind of did the point style kickboxing matchup there to win. Now his opponent, Bogdan Guskov, this guy's been like the Anthony Smith, the rerun of Anthony Smith, but like the actual Lionheart version, right? 33 years old, 6'3" with a 76-inch reach. So Jan's gonna have a little bit of a reach advantage here. Guskov's 18-3 as a pro, 4-1 in the UFC. Guskov's got 15 wins by way of KO, an 83% KO rate, 3 wins by way of submission, a 17% submission rate. Guskov's got 0 wins by decision, guys. Guskov's a 100% finish rate type of fighter. You fucking love to see it. When we take a look at Bogdan Guskov's losses, he's got 3 losses, and he's got 1 in each category. So he's got 33% of his losses by way of KO, 33% of his losses by way of submission, and 33% of his losses by way of decision. Taking a look at Guskov's last 4, he's 4-0 in his last 4. Got a big statement performance, KO win. Had Nikita Krylov kind of just making out with the mat. Unfortunately, Nikita Krylov had a very tough 2025, guys. Prior to that, he gets a big win over Billy Alicana. Now, this was a solid win because now we've been able to see the skill set of Billy Alicana really on full display, right? He gets a win over Ibo Aslan earlier this year. Gets a big win over the 6'7" guy, Kevin Christian, I think his name was. So Billy Alicana has been able to show a very strong skill set, and although on short notice, Guskov was able to handle him and gets him out of there with I think it was a rear naked choke, or it was a submission of some kind. Prior to that, he gets a flatline KO, I guess somewhat of a flatline KO, over Ryan Spann. And then prior to that, gets another big KO win over Zach Pauga. Now, obviously, strength of schedule, you could compare the two of these guys, and Jan Blachowicz is going to win that matchup any day, right? Knowing who Jan's been in there with, was a former champion, of course. Guys, when I break down this fight and their styles, obviously I think that Jan Blachowicz is not only one of the best kickboxers, but Jan Blachowicz has some of the best leg kicks that we've ever seen in the UFC, especially UFC history. Just look back at what he did to Magomed Ankalaev. Ankalaev couldn't even stand in southpaw when he was on the feet with Jan Blachowicz from those leg kicks. So when you think about that, I think keys to victory for Jan is he needs to chop the legs early and often, similar to what he's done in other fights, right? Just got to throw shin to shin and just try to batter the legs of Bogdan Guskov. That's going to take away some of that explosivity and also that forward pace and motion that Bogdan Guskov likes to bring to his fights. I also would like to see Jan utilize that fast and aggressive start that Guskov's going to bring. And what I mean by utilize that, just be the Jan Blachowicz we know, who is a very calculated and measured counter striker, very good at finding those counter strikes on the feet. I don't want to see Jan be too patient though, because if he is not throwing back with his own offense, he's going to give Guskov a level up in terms of not only pace, but just that forward motion and looking to finish the fight. So I want to see Jan consistently be throwing as well. I don't want to see him get caught by throwing too much. I think the other thing that Jan may have as a threat here against Guskov has shown submission ability, right? But I think Jan Blachowicz is going to be the much superior grappler here. But I've been seeing people saying like, oh, Jan's going to submit him in whatever round, but it's possible. But you guys have to remember, I know it was in Utah, which means there, obviously elevation, things of that nature. But when Jan Blachowicz kind of went on with a very heavy grappling approach in a matchup against Ferreira, he got gassed out pretty quick. So I don't want to see Jan spend too much time if he's having no success in the wrestling. But I do think that Jan, if he's able to get to the ground, he's going to have Bogdan Guskov in some precarious spots because Jan Blachowicz is a high-level black belt and could find a way to submit Bogdan Guskov. Now, the keys of victory for Bogdan Guskov: fast and aggressive start. I think he needs to get Jan on the back foot. He needs to land some big shots early on that makes Jan kind of guess or second guess. And guys, we've seen this. I'm one of the biggest Jan fans, but when Jan gets hit by big shots from opponents, you kind of start to see like things change in the fight, right? Like I think a lot of times people forget when Jan went up against Glover Teixeira caught him, I think, with some type of punch on the feet that had Jan just like completely second guessing what he was doing in the cage, like what his game plan was. And then suddenly we see some more success from Glover, and then Glover gets him to the ground and chokes him out. So like, I want to see Bogdan be early and fast with those heavy power shots. Be prepared for those leg kicks, right? I think if Bogdan Guskov can kind of try to switch stances, not letting Jan get too much success on either leg, I do think he's going to have to be prepared for those heavy and thudding leg kicks from Jan Blachowicz. I think he needs to throw with volume, have some feints, shouldn't rely on like the one-punch power. I think he should obviously throw some heavy shots, but try to layer in more volume, because I think as we saw against Jan when he went up against Olberg, Jan seemed to struggle a bit, especially with the volume of Olberg, especially considering that lead leg, like little tap that he was throwing. Just, I think, using more volume to get Jan off his game. when you look at the age of Jan, that's the biggest worry I have, guys, being that he's almost 43 years old coming up in March. And that is a significant disadvantage when you start to look at reaction timing and just things of that nature, things that you cannot really slow down, right? Like, I think that as we all age, that's just something that's going to happen. I mean, so when I look at all of that, guys, I think Jan Blachowicz can get a win. He could catch Bogdan Guskov and hurt him and KO him. He could hurt Bogdan Guskov's leg and then win with grappling or even just win on the feet. I think Jan has a big chance of also maybe finding a submission should he get a win. It was hard to pick this one, guys. The thing that I ultimately have to go with in terms of my choice is Bogdan Guskov and Jan Blachowicz have similar styles, but Bogdan Guskov's obviously a finisher, and he's got almost a decade of youth over Jan Blachowicz, where I think Bogdan Guskov is going to probably be too much for Jan in this fight. I hate to make it all about age, but I just think when I look at Jan in the last matchup, I do think it was a close fight against Olberg, but I think if that was the 38-year-old Jan is getting the W there because he's going to be able to move faster, react better. I think it's just he's now at a point where it's a diminishing level of return for Jan Blachowicz given that he's at a certain age. Now, could prove me dead wrong, but guys, I've got to go with Bogdan Guskov as a younger guy, the 100% finish rate. I think Bogdan Guskov is going to be very heavy with the pressure. He's going to have a little bit of height on Jan. I think that Bogdan's going to just be able to, really come forward fast and often and likely either, catch Jan and hurt him and maybe get a finish by TKO. I actually think it's more of a chance that Bogdan Guskov gets a decision win for the first time in his career, just given how scrappy Jan is. But I also would say if you guys are thinking about Bogdan getting a finish, it could happen early in the first round. And I do think that as this fight goes on, it's going to favor Jan more than Bogdan, given that Jan has had, a lot of decisions. He's also been a champion with decisions. So he knows how to stick around and has the fight IQ to change course of the fight if the going gets tough. But ultimately, guys, I got to go with Bogdan, and I'm going to say Bogdan gets does he keep the finish rate alive? Nah, I'm going to say Bogdan gets it done by way of decision. First decision. That's what I'm going to say. Lock it in. All right, guys, so we got fight number 11. We got Henry Triple C Cejduo versus Payton Frank Ocean's boy toy, I think, Talbott. Sorry, I just had to make a joke. I don't think that they're actually dating, so just scrap that. Now, this is a fun matchup, guys, because Payton Talbott, although he did lose to Raoni Barcelos, who obviously has just shown us time and time again that he is that type of guy when it comes to some of these matchups, Payton Talbott has, in my opinion, coming back from that fight against Barcelos and winning against Felipe Lima the way he did, I think that Payton Talbott, guys, is one of the best fighters in this division. He is so good. Such a weird style, too. And I just think that Payton Talbott's very good. So let's dive into this matchup. So Henry Triple C Cejduo is 38 years old, 5'4", with a 67.5-inch reach. Cejduo is 16-5 as a professional, 10-5 in the UFC. Cejudo's got 7 wins by way of KO, a 44% KO rate, 1 win by way of submission, a 6% submission rate, and then 8 wins by way of decision, a 50% decision rate, giving Triple C Cejduo a 50% finishing rate overall. Cejduo has 5 losses total. 1 of those losses came by way of KO, 20% KO loss rate, and then 4 of those losses came by way of decision, an 80% decision loss rate. Last 4 fights for Cejduo have not gone, I think, according to plan. You've got the loss to Song Yadong, which, guys, that matchup I think was a fun fight. I think that Cejduo didn't get enough credit for what he was able to do out there. I watched that fight live. I saw Cejduo landing some hard shots on Song Yadong. Now, I think Song Yadong was starting to take away and get away with more damage there against Cejduo, but the way people talked about this fight was ridiculous because I saw so many people not giving Cejduo any credit, saying that, he was faking the eye poke, but then also not even giving him credit for what he was able to do. I remember seeing him land heavy shots on Song Yadong, and now Song Yadong was landing some big shots too, but Cejduo was standing toe-to-toe with him, and I don't think that Song Yadong had Cejduo outside of the eye poke. I don't think he had Cejduo truly hurt on the feet prior to that. I think obviously he was landing big shots, but Cejduo was still in there. Now, prior to that, he got manhandled by Merab Dvalishvili, as we all saw, but he's basically the last fighter outside of Sean O'Malley landing a little teep kick in round 5 of the first fight. He's the last guy to really hurt Merab. Like, he rocked Merab in round 1 of their fight, which was a solid shot that he landed. Merab was definitely like the eyes rolled back for a second there, and I'm not talking like Ian Gary eyes rolled back. I'm talking like the eyes actually rolled back. Prior to that, he lost to Aljamain Sterling in a close title fight, but ultimately, guys, I think Aljo had his number there. And then prior to that, a win over Dominic Cruz, which was back in 2020, actually on my birthday, June 6th of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So, obviously, we know what happened there with Cejduo kind of walking away from the sport. And now he has officially announced he's going to be walking away from the sport after this matchup. And he's got a formidable and a scary opponent in Payton Talbott. Payton Talbott, guys, is no fucking joke. As I said, 27 years old, a 5'10" bantamweight fighter, which is also somewhat unheard of. I know we've got a couple guys that are 5'11", but 5'10" with a 70-inch reach, 10-1 as a professional, and he's 4-1 in the UFC. Payton Talbott's got 7 wins by way of knockout, which is 70% KO rate. He's got one win by way of submission, a 10% submission rate, and then 2 wins by way of decision, a 20% decision rate, giving Mr. Payton Talbott an 80% finishing rate overall, which you love to see, especially at bantamweight. And when we take a look at Payton Talbott's losses, there's only one to speak of that I've already mentioned, which is the one to Raoni Barcelos at the very beginning of this year of 2025. Outside of that, he has been perfect as a professional. Now, you're going to see in the last 4 fights, I forgot to color Raoni Barcelos red there, so that should be red. It's a loss. Payton Talbott is 3-1 in his last 4, compared to Cejduo, who's 1-3 in his last 4. Now, last 4 fights for Payton Talbott, like I said, a huge statement performance over Felipe Lima, where he bounced back and he showed the UFC fan base who's boss. He's not going to let us fucking sit here and say he can't wrestle anymore. Prior to that, what most called a fraud check loss to Raoni Barcelos, but Raoni Barcelos has gone on to win a few key matchups where you start to question, like, was this a fraud check or is Barcelos just that guy? He is pretty fucking good, so we got to give him credit where it's due. Prior to that, a 30-second KO win over Yanis Gamori. He landed 1 shot and just put him out cold. Prior to that, he brutalized Cameron Simon, and I believe he is to blame for completely changing Cameron Simon as a fighter. I feel like since we've seen that matchup with Payton Talbott, Cameron Simon, goes out there with Wellmaker and just gets starched out cold pretty expeditiously. And so I think that Payton Talbott is largely to blame because the damage that Simon took in the fight against Talbott was absolutely brutal. Like, it was a brutal fight from start to finish. You got to give respect to Simon for staying in there as long as he did, but Payton Talbott beat the damn shit out of him. It was bad. And shout out to Payton Talbott, guys, because he's a huge fan of No Country for Old Men. He loves Anton, who is the Javier Bardem. Call it. Anyways, jumping into the keys to victory for both these fighters, we're going to dive into that now. Henry Cejduo, guys, I think the keys to victory, and there's something that I worry about in this matchup, is that I think the keys to victory for Henry in this fight, guys, is really just he's got to get the wrestling going, and he's got to get wrestling early on in the matchup. I think if he can get his wrestling and get that cage control against Payton Talbott, get him on the ground, land some big shots, I think that is the key to victory for Henry Cejduo. We have seen Henry Cejduo do very well also with some low kicks. So I'd like to see him early and often on those low kicks and then using the feints, right? He's got to use feints for his entries. And then Henry Cejduo can mix in the boxing. I think if he can try to mix things up by hey, I'm going to feint a takedown, throw something over the top, that could be a great way for Henry to score points or even hurt Payton Talbott on the feet. I think that Henry has and obviously a very wide-ranging experience that he can bring to this matchup. He's also got a very solid fight IQ, but what I worry about is that now that Cejduo is 38 years old and just looking at previous matchups, obviously when it came to grappling and wrestling, he just hasn't been able to really bestow that dominance that we've previously seen from him in his earlier career. And I think that in this matchup specifically, it's going to be hard for him to consistently get Payton Talbott to the ground, especially knowing that he's an aging bantamweight at this point. He's going to have a very steep size disadvantage in that, Payton Talbott's about a half a foot taller than him if we're, going off of what it says on paper. I think that Henry Cejduo's main key to victory is just trying to get that wrestling going and then using the wrestling feints to land shots where he can score or hurt Payton Talbott. But I don't think If Henry Cejduo is unable to do that, it's going to be hard for him to find a victory in this matchup, in my opinion. Now, shout out to Henry Cejduo. He's also from Arizona. He went to Maryville High School. He's from Maryville, which is in Phoenix area. So shout out to Maryville's finest, Henry Cejduo. I would love to see him get a W and ride off in the sunset. Now, when I look at his opponent, though, Payton Talbott, guys, he is a different level of fighter. The guy is fucking cold. Like, he's just so good, man. He's so good using his size, the length of his arms and his reach, his legs. Like, he's so good at piecing together victories against opponents, but he's also so calm in there. He's got one of the calmest demeanors I've seen in any UFC fighter. It's almost like the moment doesn't matter to him by any stretch of the imagination. I think that Payton Talbott, if he can just keep Cejduo at the end of his long jab, his long punches and kicks, and keep that high pace, mix in some nice like knees, which he's been able to do in the past. We saw it against Cameron Simon. Just do whatever he can with those combinations to land heavy shots on Cejduo. I think that the biggest thing for Talbott, too, is just making sure he has a strong first layer of takedown defense to stop the initial takedowns from Henry. He needs to do his best to obviously get the whizzer if they get into a scrambling situation, but I think also just get the underhooks and make sure Henry cannot get low on his body, because if he does, he has a lot better chance of driving him down to the mat. But once down on the mat, I think we need to see Payton Talbott do what he did against Felipe Lima, where when Lima was able to kind of get into these grappling exchanges, Payton Talbott was able to kind of Granby roll or do different things to use the momentum of Felipe Lima against him. And if he does that against Henry Cejduo, I see this one going very favorably in the side of Payton Talbott. But I don't want Talbott to get too overzealous early on. I want to see him just do his best to put together his strikes on the feet and just be prepared for the grappling of Henry Cejduo. Ultimately, guys, I'm rooting for Cejduo, given that he's coming from Phoenix. You got to root for your hometown folk. But I just see Payton Talbott being too much of a tough matchup here for Henry, especially being Payton Talbott's much younger. Henry's aging. He's going to be retiring. I see this somewhat being like a passing of the torch type of thing, where Payton Talbott likely gets a win, potentially a late finish, but I actually see it going to decision in favor of Payton Talbott, and that is my final pick for this one. All right, guys, we got fight number 12 here. This is a fantastic showcase fight for the flyweight division. Right before we dive into who is going to win in the co-main event for the flyweight belt, we've got this amazing fight between Brandon Assassin Baby Moreno and Tatsuro Taira. So, taking a look at this fight, guys, obviously very highly skilled flyweights. You got Mr. Moreno, who's kind of been around the world and back, won the belt twice in the flyweight division. He's done everything. He got snipped from the UFC, went on a win streak, came back, then went on his way to win the goddamn belt like a fucking G that he is. Gotta love Brandon Moreno. But then Tatsuro Taira, on the other hand, he lost a, I would say somewhat of a close fight, but he really just got schooled by Brandon Royval. Now, he was so young at the time, still such a young fighter. He bounces back in a huge way against Hyun-Sung Park, which, at the time was a big win. But now I think after seeing Park go up against Silva, I think people, especially myself, have changed tune a bit in terms of where his skill set might be at. But regardless, when we take a look at this matchup, we got Brandon Moreno. He is 31 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach, which is definitely a solid reach, especially for this division. Brandon Moreno's 23-8 as a pro, and he's 11-5 in the UFC. Moreno's got 5 wins by way of knockout, a 22% KO rate, 11 wins by way of submission, a 48% submission rate, 7 wins by way of decision, a 30% decision rate, giving Assassin Baby a 70% finishing rate overall. You fucking love to see this, guys. You're gonna see this too in our co-main event. 2 flyweights who've got very high finishing rates, which is honestly, if you go and look at some of the other fighters in the division, it's very few and far between these fighters having a significant finishing rate overall. Moreno only has lost by way of decision in his career, so he's got 8 losses, 100% of them coming by way of decision loss. And then when we take a look at his last 4 fights, Brandon Moreno not very recently, but March of this year, end of March, got a win over Steve Erceg in Mexico City. Prior to that, a big win over Amir Albazi. Prior to that, the pair of losses that he had, he lost to Brandon Royval and he lost to Pantoja. Now, looking back on those losses, I think the loss to Pantoja was such a razor close one. You almost start to question, like, I know that Pantoja dropped Moreno a couple times in that fight, so definitely damage-wise, that's not a good look. But when you consider the amount of volume of attacks that Brandon landed, and then you consider that Pantoja just kind of got a back take for, I think, like one of the later rounds, just kind of stayed on his back, didn't land much. You know, seeing how the judges have changed a bit in terms of how they score fights, you might have a different nod there just based on that. But regardless, he comes back into that fight against Brandon Royval where he just did not look like himself whatsoever. Royval was kind of just piecing him up and moving around the cage, and Moreno didn't look like the Moreno we have seen. And I think he had a bit of a break, came back, and now he's got a pair of wins, and he's looking to mark his way to a title shot. Tatsuro Taira, though, is not going to be an easy night at the office for Brandon Moreno, right? Tatsuro Taira is not only 25 years old, so he's a nice young whippersnapper coming into this fight. Actually, only a little bit older than Joshua Van when you think about it. Tatsuro Taira, though, is 5'7", and he also shares a 70-inch reach, which is a huge reach for the flyweight division. I mean, it's almost 6 feet tall when you consider that, like, the champ of this division's 5'5". Like, it's crazy to think about. Tatsuro Taira is 17-1 as a professional, 7-1 in the UFC. Tatsuro Taira's got 5 wins by way of knockout, 29% KO rate, 8 wins by way of submission, a 49% submission rate. 8 wins by way of submission, a 47% submission rate, and then 4 wins by way of decision, a 24% decision rate, giving Tatsuro Taira a 76% finishing rate overall. Fuck, it's like these guys are middleweights or light heavyweights with that finishing rate. It's crazy. And I actually know this, guys, because as I've been doing these cards, I've been able to see somewhat of those differences that come between weight classes and finishing rates. And this is super unheard of for flyweight. Now, taking a look at Tatsuro's losses, he has one loss that I mentioned already, which came by way of Brandon Raw Dog Royval back in 2024. That's his only loss, came by way of decision. And when we look at his last 4 fights, he's 3-1 in his last 4. Got that big win over Hyun Sung Park, which was a return fight for him after his first professional loss to Brandon Royval. Prior to that, he got a big win over Alex Perez and a big win over Carlos Hernandez. So Tatsuro Taira is definitely no slouch, and he's got 8 fights in the UFC. So it's not like he hasn't made his way or earned his shot against a guy like Brandon Moreno. Now, guys, when we consider the keys to victory for both these guys, for Brandon Moreno, I believe the keys to victory for him are, 1, maintaining and ensuring he has his scramble savvy grappling on full display in this matchup. I think Tatsuro Taira, where he's going to have some strengths and advantages potentially, will be some of those wrestling or chain grappling exchanges. And we need to see Moreno just stay on top of not only having that solid takedown defense, but being very scrappy and savvy with those scrambles that he's been able to show us in pretty much all of his matchups, even against that of Pantoja. But he does not want to let Tatsuro Taira get in the driver's seat for too long, because in a 3-round matchup, Tatsuro Taira has that ability to potentially just gain control on the ground. So I want to see Brandon Moreno come out there and utilize that high-paced scrambling ability that we've seen on display in previous fights, just not giving Tatsuro Taira any chance to gain control. And if he's able to scramble out or even just scramble into a better position where he can gain control, I think that would be very fitting for a Brandon Moreno. Now, I think another thing that we need to see from Brandon Moreno off the rip is just keeping that nice high guard that he has, with that nice clean high boxing guard. He's got that machismo boxing style. I think he needs to just be very elusive on the feet with the footwork and just snap that jab out there. We've seen Brandon Moreno, guys. His hands are fucking awesome. So good at not only landing combinations, but the way he's able to mix in his strikes, right? He can land a lead hook, go from lead hook to an uppercut, back to the lead hook. He's very good at switching things up too. I would like to see him just keep those high-paced boxing combinations in the face of Tatsuro Taira, make him guess, and also make him miss, right? Try to advance and don't get caught by those counter shots. A big thing for Moreno here is he has been able to be caught by some big shots in previous fights. So I just want to make sure he is staying not only, solid with his own boxing, but staying solid with the defense, right? He's been very good about keeping that high guard up, making sure things aren't really hitting the important spots of the face, if you know what I'm saying. I think if he can just continuously stay with his boxing and push a pace on Tatsuro Taira, especially throwing. I think we need to see that textbook lead body kick from Brandon Moreno and throw that right into the guts of Tatsuro Taira and do it in a way where you're using the fight IQ and you're not getting caught by Tatsuro Taira, who's either could be timing that for a counter strike or even timing that for a takedown. Now, the keys to victory for Tatsuro Taira. I think main key to victory for him is trying to find takedowns when he can and establishing those back takes or just overall ground control when he is able to on Brandon Moreno. That could mean waiting for Brandon Moreno to throw some type of kick or, throw a strike that gets his center of gravity or his balance off and then, utilizing that opportunity to grab a takedown. I do think that when going for these takedowns and getting Brandon Moreno to the ground, Tatsuro Taira just needs to maintain very heavy hip pressure. Just respect the ability, the scrambling ability that Brandon Moreno is going to bring to this matchup and have that heavy hip pressure to try to pin Moreno and keep him close to the mat. So that way Tatsuro Taira can not only gain control, but then try to find those openings from a submission perspective, whether it be, if he's able to get top position and then float around to even like an arm triangle or something like that. I think a submission aspect to this would be very solid for Tatsuro Taira, but I think you also have to consider and respect the fact that Brandon Moreno has never been finished by way of submission nor by way of KO, and he's gone in there against some of the best grapplers. So I think Tatsuro Taira, what might be a better option for him is just trying to land with damage on the ground, but giving Moreno just is little space to breathe in terms of, finding that escape or that scramble out. I think that for striking, Tatsuro Taira, the best option for him here is just mixing in those straight shots that he's been able to deploy on his other opponents. We saw actually he dropped Hyun-Sung Park with a sharp right hand on the chin. I think if Tatsuro Taira can be a bit of a sniper in there, he is going to have to deal with that nonstop boxing pressure that Brandon Moreno is going to bring. Brandon Moreno's also showed some leveling up in terms of his calf kicks. So I think if Tatsuro Taira can just stay measured and wait for those openings, not being overzealous, because I think it could be a long night for Tatsuro Taira if he is trying to match the pace, especially from a boxing perspective, that Brandon Moreno is going to bring. I think if Tatsuro could stay a little bit on the back foot, be a bit of a sniper, and try to land those calculated straight shots when they can mean something, right? So just land something when Moreno's maybe moving in. Try to time it in a way where you can catch him. That is your best option if you're Tatsuro Taira in this matchup. I think that if he can just try to time the strikes of Brandon Moreno so that he can open up those opportunities for takedowns or landing counter shots. Ultimately, guys, this fight is such a fun one. I want to say Tatsuro Taira can get this one done, guys, but what I worry about is that when we saw Tatsuro Taira go up against a Brandon Royval, now that was a 5-round fight and a bit on short notice, but regardless, he goes in there against a Brandon Royval, and you kind of see the levels, right, of the veteran in the UFC who's had that experience, who's gone in there with the best. We saw that on full display against Tatsuro Taira, and in this matchup, similarly, you're going to have a Brandon Moreno who, based on just the numbers in what we saw on paper, now it's not always exactly what it looks like, right? Like we could see a size disadvantage once these guys get in there, but generally speaking, if you're just looking at, Brandon Moreno being the same height, having the same reach, Tatsuro Taira is not really going to have that towering aspect that he's had in some of his other matchups against smaller flyweights. And I think when you consider that he didn't have the best performance against a Brandon Royval, and he's still a young fighter, I just feel like this is a tailor-made fight for Brandon Moreno to win by way of decision. Could be a very close fight, but I just feel like if Brandon Moreno is able to stay out of trouble, stay scrappy on the feet, and stay away from the ground control that Tatsuro Taira could potentially bring, this is a tailor-made decision win for Brandon Moreno, and that is what I am going to lean for here. I think Brandon Moreno can get this one done by way of decision, but Tatsuro Taira is still very live to potentially, out-grapple Moreno. Perhaps he pulls a Protez, right, and is able to finish a guy like Moreno, who's never been finished, by submission, or I don't necessarily see the KO, but regardless, it is something that could happen in this matchup. I just think that Brandon Moreno is going to have the skills to get out of those bad positions on the ground if it gets there, and then I think he will be a lot better on the feet, especially with his crispy boxing, his ability to string together combinations. I'm going Brandon Moreno to get it done. All right, guys, we've got the co-main event of the evening here between the cannibal Alexandre Pantoja versus Joshua Van. Pantoja, guys, he has been a dominant champion, and this guy is 35 years old, 5'5", with a 68-inch reach. Pantoja is 30-5 as a professional, 14-3 in the UFC. Pantoja's got 8 wins by way of knockout, that's 27% KO rate, 12 wins by way of submission, a 40% submission rate, and 10 wins by way of decision, a 33% decision rate, giving the Cannibal a 67% finishing rate overall, which is fantastic for the flyweight division specifically. Taking a look at Pantoja's losses, he has never been finished in the octagon, giving him only 5 losses by way of decision, which is 100% there. Now, the last 4 fights for Pantoja, similar to what you guys will see in the main event, a bit of a dominant champion here. I got a win over Brandon Royval back at UFC 296. I got to watch that one live. Then he follows that up with a win over Steve Erceg, who was number 10 at the time. Something that we're kind of seeing in other divisions happening, right? Mr. Paddy Pimblett himself, who's, he's not number 10, number 5, but regardless, he got promoted to number 5. Next win came over Kaya Sakura, which happened in December of last year, where he got a huge statement win over a guy who was kind of expected to come in here and just starch him out cold. And Pantoja not only put those paws on him, but then he chokes him out. And then finally, a massive win over Kai Kara-France that happened on International Fight Week. These two actually, Pantoja gets this win and Joshua Van got his big win over Royval, which set up this matchup that we've all kind of been waiting for the last 6 months. So, taking a look at his opponent, or his adversary in this case, it's Joshua Van, Miramar's finest. This guy is from Miramar, and he actually left there because they were in the middle of a war. So Joshua Van actually kind of grew up in the starts of what we've seen some of these other very highly accredited UFC fighters start in, which is a war-torn country. Now, Joshua Van is 24 years old. He's 5'5", with a 65-inch reach. So we're going to have a bit of a reach advantage here, a 3-inch reach advantage for that of Pantoja. Joshua Van's 15-2 as a pro, 8-1 in the UFC. Van has 7 wins by way of KO, a 47% KO rate. Van has 2 wins by way of submission, a 13% submission rate. Van has 6 wins by way of decision, a 40% decision rate, giving Joshua Van a 60% finishing rate overall. So look at these two guys with very high finishing rates, above 50% in the flyweight division. You'll love to see it. Now, Joshua Van has 2 professional losses, as I mentioned. One of those losses came by way of KO, making it 50% of his losses overall. The other loss for Joshua Van came by way of submission, giving him a 50% decision or submission loss rate overall as well. And guys, that is one thing I just want to call out before we dive into the last 4 opponents. One thing that I do worry about in the case of Joshua Van is, while he's probably had 5-round fights outside of the UFC, he has yet to go a full 5 rounds from what I can recall in the UFC. Obviously, as you guys can see, he's never lost by way of decision. So, that's one thing, but he does have a few wins by decision, but I don't see that he's gone a full 5 rounds, which is going to be a bit worrisome, especially going up against a formidable champion like Alexandre Pantoja, who's shown that he can kind of go the distance, especially when the going gets tough against a guy who has probably better cardio. We saw that, I feel like, against Steve Erceg and even against Mr. Brandon Moreno, who he won the belt off of. Taking a look at the last 4 fights for Joshua Van, he's got a win over Brandon Royval, which was a fantastic win because right before that, he fought on June 7th, 2024 or 2025, where he beats Brunno Silva with a nice 3rd round KO. He beat the crap out of him for 2 and then just knocks him out in the 3rd. Goes back out there only 21 days later to get a win over the surging and very tough cookie that is Brandon Royval. So Joshua Van has just had a legendary run this year, guys. Part of that, a win over Ray Saruya, who came in with a lot of wrestling accolades, was expected to be able to kind of manhandle and take Joshua Van to the ground. Joshua Van says hell no and beats the crap out of him on the feet, wins a fight by decision. Prior to that, a win over Cody Durden. So definitely a very successful run here for Joshua Van. It's like, I feel like people either don't know or have completely forgot Joshua Van was beating up Charles Johnson Mr. Energy for a few rounds before Charles Johnson lands that KO blow at the end of round 3, which is just a Charles Johnson trademark, right? We saw this against Loney Kavanaugh as well. Just gets pieced up on, but then finds his shot and puts him out cold. But people have forgotten about this because Joshua Van has basically forced us to get rid of that in our memory by going out there and having statement-winning performances over other contenders and just making us forget, like, by being an active and successfully active fighter in this flyweight division. Now, before I give you guys the lay of the land in terms of who I'm picking and why, we're going to dive into some of the keys to victory for each of these guys that I've kind of worked up on my end, right? So when I take a look at this fight, guys, you got Pantoja's keys to victory. It's going to be the clinch, the back takes, utilizing that multi-faceted skill set that he has in grappling, but also the decade-plus longer skills that Pantoja brings from a grappling perspective. This guy's got some of the best clinch and back takes that we've all seen in the UFC. He's so creative, so able to just mix in those takedowns as well. Very high fight IQ. And another thing that Pantoja does very well, guys, he is not afraid to be in a dogfight. He has gone toe-to-toe with almost every single one of his opponents that we've seen him go up against, whether it be Brandon Royval, whether it be a Kai Asakura, like especially the Kai Asakura fight, you got Pantoja just trading bombs with him, not giving a fuck what's coming back his way, even eats a flying knee to get the takedown, and then just manhandles him. Also walks out to Many Men by 50 Cent, which is one of the coldest walkout songs. You gotta love that shit. So I think that in this fight, if Pantoja can just go out there, not be afraid of that fast twitch and the speed of volume type punching that Joshua Van brings. I think if Pantoja can go out there, pick his shots, land those shots that got more mustard on him, right? Because I think Pantoja, one thing that we've seen him have a lot of success with against previous opposition is, for instance, when he went up against Brandon Moreno, we saw Brandon Moreno was cleaner, faster, landing more volume by a lot, at least from what I recall. But when Pantoja would land one, it'd be like Moreno lands 4 punches, Pantoja lands 1. It was like that 1 punch from Pantoja was hurting Moreno more than the 4 that he was eating. Now, not the best thing to call out there, but what I'm getting at is I think that Pantoja has a unique amount of power, especially for his frame and size, that I think is going to be worrisome for someone like Joshua Van, who has been caught in the past. I think that if Pantoja just puts that grown man strength on him, makes it mean, uses that pace and physicality, because I think that Joshua Van has a very unique skill set in his own right? We're going to get to that, but he is very good with volume punching, very good with pushing that pace on opponents. I think that if Pantoja just kind of matches that pace, right, he doesn't kind of sit back, he's forward on that front foot, landing heavy shots, but also forcing Joshua Van to be on the back foot and then being very selective about how he goes in for these takedowns, because he doesn't want Joshua Van to land a sneaky shot while he's going in, right? Because that could be worrisome for someone like Pantoja, especially given that he has been in quite a few wars in his career. I think that not only should Pantoja just mix in even those overhands, those hooks, I think if he can also utilize some heavy calf kicking, which I do think in his training for this, knowing that he trains, I think, out of American Top Team, he's got a lot of great calf kickers there, a lot of great leg kickers there. I think if he can mix in those calf kicks and really batter that leg, especially the lead leg of Joshua Van, early and often, it will make and pay dividends for him as this fight goes, to the later rounds, should it go there. I do think that if Pantoja is able to snatch up that takedown, take that opportunity, and then I think you force Joshua Van to really have to grapple on the ground. We haven't really seen too much from Joshua Van there. We've seen some great takedown defense, but we haven't seen Josh Van go up against someone like Pantoja, who not only has some of the best and most powerful striking, but some of the best grappling, especially in the flyweight division. I don't want to see Pantoja get into long-standing boxing combinations or boxing exchanges with Joshua Van, because I do think that although Pantoja's got hands himself, Van is going to have a significant advantage when it goes to, that pocket-type boxing. So I want to see Pantoja, land heavy shots when he can, but not stay too long in those punching situations with Joshua Van. Now, when we take a look at Joshua Van, guys, I think one of the most clear elements to success or keys to success for Joshua Van is to stay away from the back of the cage. Does not want his back on that cage whatsoever. He needs to utilize that crispy footwork in that volume boxing we've seen him use. I want to see Joshua Van go to the body early, mix in those body shots as much as possible, because I think when we've seen Pantoja kind of wilt or be hurt, I just recall Brandon Moreno specifically landing some body kicks on Pantoja that would make him kind of almost think like, shit, I don't want that. Now, I worry about Joshua Van throwing body kicks himself because he hasn't always been much of a kicker. And if he is giving up one of his feet to land on Pantoja, he's giving Pantoja a very solid opportunity to grab that leg and get a takedown. So I want to see Josh Van just use that clean footwork, get out of danger when it comes to getting backed up against the cage, use the volume boxing. But I think also from Van, like if he can use that volume boxing that he always does, but still be a little bit hesitant in terms of waiting for finding the right counter shot, that could also pay huge dividends for him. Because if he is just constantly out there throwing combos, he's going to give Pantoja more opportunity to react to things. So I think if Van can almost kind of like, throw the volume boxing, but then feint like he's going to continue that and maybe throw like a big uppercut or something, just make Pantoja think about those shots that he's going to try to take, especially when it comes to the takedowns. Now, if Joshua Van can stay consistent with his takedown defense, this is going to go very well for him, in my opinion, because I do think on the feet, Pantoja is going to have more power, but Van is going to have that volume boxing that we've seen just melt people. And I know that Pantoja in the past, guys, has not done that well against guys who can pick up the volume like that. I think it's just if Van can stay out of danger when Pantoja is looking to land a solid power shot, because we've seen Pantoja drop or hurt other fighters in this division, specifically drop Moreno a couple times. So I just don't want to see Joshua Van be, kind of like overzealous for too long with those combinations, leaving himself open for something that could be a hard power shot or a hard counter shot from that of Pantoja. I think that finally, should this hit the floor, which I do believe it will, Joshua Van needs to keep his composure in these scrambles. He needs to keep his composure when locked up in a bad or precarious position from Pantoja, because I think that is going to be Pantoja's world. So if Joshua Van can keep his composure there, do his best to, especially, if Pantoja gets that trademark back take, Joshua Van needs to do his best to, A, don't pull a Michael Chandler, don't try to jump and land on the back, because you're just going to get yourself in worse spots there. B, just do the baseball grip. Fight that hand all times, no matter what. Don't stop fighting those hands, because that is where Pantoja is likely to get a finish against Joshua Van. So ultimately, guys, I think that this fight is such a fantastic fight, such a unique set of styles kind of clashing here. But I have to say, ever since I've seen Pantoja do what he did against Kai Asakura, like when you as an MMA fan and even just a content creator, just kind of seeing what different fans or creators are saying about him, to see the amount of people kind of going against him in that fight, thinking Kai Asakura is going to come in here and just snatch the belt off him. Now, there were a lot of people that didn't have any chance for Kai Asakura to get it done there, but there was also a lot that felt Kai Asakura was going to take off Pantoja's head. And Pantoja went out there to many men like he always does, and he put them fucking paws on him. He hurt him. He hurt Asakura more in that fight on the feet, and then he fucking finished him. Guys, Pantoja is a force to be reckoned with. I think Pantoja is one of the best that we've ever seen. When you consider his resume, who he has beaten, right? He has beaten pretty much everyone you can imagine except for Demetrius Johnson. And I can't recall, but I don't think he's gotten a win over Davison Figueiredo. I think it was the opposite. But regardless, Pantoja has always been one of the dark horses of this division, and now he's been the reigning champ. I am looking and thinking that Pantoja gets this one done. Now, Joshua Van gets it done, guys. I'm super happy because I think Joshua Van is similar to that of Pantoja, but Joshua Van is a straight-up dog when it comes to, I'm not going to fucking sit around and wait. I'm going to put my shit on the line. I'm going to get out there and try to get defenses. I think Joshua Van beating Pantoja would make for a very fun flyweight division. Even though I do think Pantoja's already made it very fun, I think Joshua Van being in there not only opens up a lot of new matchups for him at the top of the division, but I think we would also see a lot of activity here. But I don't think that we're starved for activity really in the flyweight division as it stands. I think Pantoja has been pretty active as a champ. I believe he's getting about 2 to 3. He's going for 2 fights a year at least. And in this case, he's got his fight back in June and now the fight in December. So should he get this one done, I think he's got, he's still going to be an active champ. I just think Pantoja, guys, is, a bit older, and he's probably likely to show Joshua Van a few tricks of the trade here. But Joshua Van, if he loses, I don't think this reduces his stock by any stretch of the imagination, because Joshua Van's already built a solid fan base. He's an active fighter. We saw him grow quite a bit even after losing to Charles Johnson. So ultimately, even if he should lose to Pantoja, I think that Van can bounce back pretty quickly. But ultimately, guys, I got to go with Pantoja getting the W here. I see Pantoja either getting a win by way of submission in the later rounds or a decision win overall. But could be dead wrong. I think this is a tough fight because we haven't seen Joshua Van go up against a guy with the caliber of skills that Pantoja brings. So it'll be interesting to see. Ultimately, guys, I got to go Pantoja getting the... All right, guys, and we finally made it to the main event of the evening. We've got Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan. Petr no mercy Yan. So before diving into these guys and their individual stats, the one thing I want to call out here is that I do think that when you look at this matchup between Merab and Petr Yan, it's kind of a very unique clash of styles, but I do think that this is tailor-made as a poor matchup for Petr Yan. And the reason I say that is because Petr Yan, as we all know, has historically been a slow starter. Now, he did seem to pick things up a bit faster in fights against like Deiveson Figueiredo and Marcus McGee, but Petr Yan being a slow starter is not going to pay dividends, especially against someone like Merab Dvalishvili, who, although he is the machine, he seems to get that machine really start to work in overtime in those later rounds, especially like round 3 through 5 is where I think Merab starts to shine. And I think that alone is such a clash of like what Petr Yan is looking to do, right? Because Petr Yan generally takes about a round or two to just collect data on his opponent. And I think if he is doing that in this matchup, similar to what happened in the first fight, it is not going to be a good night for him. But let's go ahead and dive into their stats. So when I take a look at Merab, 34 years old, 5'6", with a 68-inch reach. Merab is 21-4 as a professional, 14-2 in the UFC. He lost his first 2 fights in the UFC and now is on a 14-fight winning streak. I think Merab is either 3rd or 4th right now in the UFC win streaks of all time. So another win here just gets him closer to that record as well. Merab has 3 wins by way of KO, which is only 14% of his... Merab has 3 wins by way of KO, 14% KO rate. 2 wins by way of submission, a 10% submission rate, 16 wins by way of decision, a 76% decision rate, giving Merab only a 24% finishing rate overall. So not much of a finisher as we've seen. Obviously, he has, I guess if you're looking at, a recent fight, he did get a finish over Sean O'Malley, almost got Corey Sandhagen out there as well. So he is starting to pick it up a bit there. Taking a look at Rob's losses, he has 1 loss that was by way of submission. That is 25% of his losses overall. And then he has 3 losses by way of decision, 75% of his losses overall. Taking a look at Merab's last 4 fights, we've all seen a very dominant run here for Merab. He has that win where he snatched the belt from Sean O'Malley, got the win over Umar Nurmagomedov in his first title defense, goes out there, defends it again against Sean O'Malley, and then defends it again against Corey Sandhagen, and now he is on his way to potentially defending against Petr Yan in the same calendar year. Petr Yan, on the other hand, 32 years old, 5'7", with a 67-inch reach, 19-5 as a pro, 11-4 in the UFC. Petr has 7 wins by way of knockout. That's a 37% KO rate. He has 1 win by way of submission, a 5% submission rate, 11 wins by way of decision, a 58% decision rate, giving Petr Yan a 42% finishing rate overall. So definitely more significant there than Merab. You could just swap the 2 and the 4 there, and that's how you make up their difference. And then taking a look at Petr Yan's losses, he has never been finished by knockout nor by submission. So all of his losses came by way of decision, which is 5 total. Taking a look at Petr's last 4 fights, he has that win over Marcus McGee, which is a solid win back in June. And then prior to that, he had a win over Deiveson Figueiredo and a win over Song Yadong. The Song Yadong fight actually aged very well because that was a back-and-forth scrap where Petr was able to get the upper hand there. And then prior to that, he had his loss to Merab Dvalishvili. Now, Petr Yan has said that he was only 30% in that fight, so this is another matchup where we have a rematch against Merab, where the previous foe has said, oh, I was only X% in that fight. Wait till I'm 100%. The last time this happened, Sean O'Malley ended up getting finished. So it kind of begs the question of, is that something that could be on the horizon here against Petr Yan? Now, before giving you guys my pick, I'm going to break down some of the keys to victory for Merab and then the keys to victory for Petr Yan, and then I'll give you guys why I think. Then I'll tell you guys who I think is going to win and the reason why. Obviously, when we take a look at Merab, guys, he has one of the most confusing but best herky-jerky type styles when it comes to mixing in the striking and mixing in the grappling, right? One of the best abilities to just be relentless with that wrestling and just a limitless gas tank when it comes to Merab. This dude never gets tired. He is shooting takedowns, throwing punches, throwing kicks, shooting takedowns. Like, it just never ends. He doesn't ever take a break. I mean, the guy runs fucking mountains for fun. So just let that sink in terms of what kind of gas tank he's going to bring to every fight that he has. Another, I think, an important thing here is just having Merab just continuously keep things very confusing, using that herky-jerky style, shooting a single leg, maybe not committing fully to it, but putting the hands on the leg there, getting Petr Yan to react a lot more to that wrestling, which is going to open up the hands for Merab. It always does. It's how Merab's been able to not only catch some of the best strikers. He caught Petr Yan a few times in their first matchup. He was able to catch and hurt Sean O'Malley in a couple moments, even caught and hurt Umar Nurmagomedov, obviously Sandhagen as well. So I think if he's able to mix in very strategically or just sporadically the way he always does, he's going to have them thinking, okay, the takedown's coming, I've got to stop this, and that's going to open up the strikes on the feet. I do think that if he can also mix in that clinch grind that he has and some of the mat returns, when guys try to get back to their feet, I think if he can drag Yan back down, because I think Yan is going to be very pinpoint focused on not only stopping takedowns, but once taken down, getting back to his feet. If Merab can just implement that strong grappling style where he can kind of ride the hips of Yan, pull him back to the mat, get him back to the ground. I would like to see Merab shoot. I would like to see him go for a little bit more submission threats here, especially because I think in a guy like Petr Yan, who's definitely going to want to keep things standing, he is likely to get to his feet much faster than some of the other guys that he's fought. Like specifically when you take a look at Sandhagen or O'Malley being taller guys for this division, it's not going to be as easy for them to just stand straight up. Whereas Petr Yan, I think, is going to have a lower center of gravity. He's going to be able to probably shuck off takedowns better, but also get to his feet easier. I would like to see Merab continuously just switch things up on him, but then also when he gets Petr in these precarious ground positions, actually go for those finishes instead of just kind of riding it out, because that could allow him to either find a finish or just have Petr weary of just standing straight up to his feet. Now, taking a look at the keys to victory for Petr Yan, it's going to be super integral that he stops every takedown that comes his way. Now, is he going to be able to stop every takedown? Probably not. I think it's not only having those takedown defenses when he can, but also finding separation whenever it is allowed, right? I know Merab is going to be very sticky. He's going to be very in the face of Petr Yan, but if Petr Yan can, not only stop the takedowns, especially against the cage, and circle out, get separation from Merab, and he has to be very active on the feet. Petr Yan cannot be downloading data in this fight, because I think the longer he is kind of waiting and accepting things from Merab, it's just going to put him in a negative situation when it comes to the scorecard. So I think if Peter's really looking to win this and win it in a way where he doesn't need the finish but could win by decision, I think Petr has to make this a bit of a dogfight from start to finish. He needs to be landing. I think he's got to use that very clean boxing that he has. He's got to use those straight punches, I think, from at range, because although Merab's got a little bit longer of reach, I think Peter's best bet is landing some of those shots at range and then being prepared and timing some of those power shots, like maybe even a knee or perhaps an uppercut when Merab is going for the takedown. It's going to be very hard to time Merab, as we've seen. Sean O'Malley couldn't do it, one of the best snipers in this division. Even Umar Nurmagomedov couldn't stop it. So I do think that the knees and the uppercuts are going to be very strong tools for Petr Yan, but he has to time it the right way. And then I think if he can find moments where Merab is maybe slowing down, I would like to see him use, that surge of cardio that he has, that he tends to store over the course of a fight. Petr Yan is not a fighter that I've seen get like exhausted. Like he usually can hang in there for 5 rounds, but I would like to see him also mix in body shots early. I think if he can mix in some nice body work to kind of hurt Merab to the body, and maybe even, we've seen Sean O'Malley have success with that. I think if he can find those body combinations and mix in some headshots, it would be solid. I think it's going to be harder to hit Merab in the head given how herky-jerky he is. So hit him in the torso and hit him in the body where it's not going to be as easy for him to feint attacks or even get out of the way of those attacks. And then I would also like to see Petr Yan. He's not much of a calf kicker, but if he can mix in some calf kicks, try to just offset some of that movement and footwork that Merab brings, which I think will slow the pace down a bit. And a slower pace for Merab is what's going to give Petr Yan a chance at winning this fight, in my opinion. Overall, guys, I love both these fighters. Merab took longer for me to grow on, especially given that he is not much of a finisher. But I just love the way Merab fights is just, he makes it a dogfight, and he just shows his opponents every time, like, look, you think you can go into deep waters, I'll show you what the deep waters feel like, and he makes them drown. And you gotta love that type of style. He's just kind of all over them. In this matchup, guys, I gotta say, although I think Petr Yan's a very great fighter, I believe he is championship level, he's been there before, I just don't see, unless he's able to starch out Merab, like starch him out cold, I can't see Petr Yan winning like a unanimous decision in this place. I just think that Merab, the way his style is, he is kind of a nightmare matchup for Petr Yan, guys. I am not only rooting for, but I am picking Merab to win this one, likely by unanimous decision. I also want Merab to win because it's going to be a historic night for us as fans to not only see if Merab does get the win, we're going to see the most title defenses in 1 year and the most title defenses achieved at bantamweight in history. So that's a huge, huge moment, and I'm going to root that Merab gets this one done over Petr Yan. There you guys have it. Those are my breakdowns for UFC 323. Make sure you guys comment below. Let me know who you guys are picking in each of these matchups. Would love to hear from you guys. This is going to be a super fun card. We got one more card after that, and then we're into the Paramount era. This has been a great year, so thank you guys so much for watching.